All right. Hello and welcome to day 4 of the first World Prosperity Forum, organized and streamed by the Heartland Institute. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Executive Vice President of the Heartland Institute, and we are streaming live from Zurich, Switzerland, not Davos. Though yesterday we sent a delegation from this forum to Ground Zero for the world's gathering of blue-haired weirdos, amateur circus performers, and the planet's most delusional leftists. But enough about the dignitaries speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Our delegation also encountered some street protesters, and I hope we're going to get a report on a lot of that later today. Yesterday, like I said, this is day 4 of our 5-day forum here in Switzerland. Yesterday, one of our speakers, Callum Nicholson of the Danube Institute in Hungary, said of Donald Trump that he is not just fiery, but the fire. And often a conflagration is just what a forest choking from deadwood and bad growth needs to get healthy again. He also said Donald Trump is a stress test. That is clear, judging by the reaction of the global media every time Trump clears his throat, and by the behavior of all the global leaders here in Switzerland before, during, and after Trump's visit on Wednesday. They're all going to need therapy, and frankly, probably always needed it. Donald Trump is a safe space disruptor. He's the bull in the panic room. He's the adult who walks into the room full of world leaders clutching plush toys and emotional support kittens who don't like to hear the honest truth about the state of the world today. But getting back to Callum Nicholson's analogy of Trump being a stress test, I told him yesterday that I thought that was an apt and very insightful analogy. Important structures, important institutions, if they are to endure, must undergo real stress tests on a regular basis. Bridges require stress tests to gauge their stability and soundness from time to time. Failing to do so means that one day it will fail into disastrous results. The same holds true for institutions like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and even one's country's relationship with other nations. Structural engineers don't conduct stress tests to bring the bridge down. They conduct them to learn where the vulnerable places are. The purpose of a stress test is to ensure that the structure is strong and will endure, and to fix the places of weakness. I think Trump has been doing that all along, including yesterday. The important question to focus on is not how severe Trump's stress tests are, but whether these institutions and alliances that present themselves as vital and enduring and necessary to preserve our civilizational inheritance is made of steel or it's made of paper. Whether you're a fan of Trump and his refreshing America First perspective, or one who clings to the idea that these generations-old international agreements are essential to preserving some sort of global order, no matter what your perspective, I think the jury is still out. Either way, Trump's stress test shows that there's a lot of work to do to shore it up, and it seems only he can provide it. James Taylor, the president of the Heartland Institute, asked me to start our meeting today exploring this theme. Quote, Trump and Vance are right to call out the EU ruling class. Yeah, that title kind of tips our hand a little bit, but we, the organizers of the World Prosperity Forum, make no apology for it. After all, we are doing this to give voice to the literally billions around the world who rightly look with suspicion upon unaccountable global elites who seek to control literally every aspect of our lives, to take away all of our individual choices and the choices we make at the ballot box together as freely assembled people. The burden is on them, the global elite, to respect and honor those choices. They haven't, as Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance said in their 2 biggest addresses on the global stage since their move to the White House in 2025. Less than a month after Donald Trump and J.D. Vance were sworn in as president and vice president, Trump sent Vance to the Munich Security Conference to deliver a speech. The date was February 14th, and whatever is the opposite of a Valentine's Day card is what Vance delivered. Vance's speech was derided by the world's press and many of the global elite in attendance as controversial. It was described as stunning, a blistering attack, and even a brutal ideological assault. European officials were reportedly outraged. Well, what did Vance say to get our allies at a mutual security conference into such a tizzy? Vance accused the global elite here in Europe of suppressing free speech, censoring dissent, failing to control mass migration, and eroding democratic norms. As I say about the Heartland Institute, when we get attacked by our opponents in the arena of ideas, you only get flack when you're over the target. And Vance delivered hit after hit. On free speech, Vance said it was in retreat all across Europe. And we all see what's going on. We know that this is true. How is Vance wrong? He noted in a particularly egregious case, quote, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes, not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own, and even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law, unquote. This example hits pretty hard for Americans this week as they witnessed a leftist mob storm a Christian church during services in St. Paul, Minnesota, and then watched as the media shrugged it off and even praised it as a righteous act of social justice on behalf of criminal illegal aliens. Meanwhile, the Biden administration arrested and federally charged truly peaceful protesters for opposing abortion outside of clinics and not obstructing anyone, let alone storming into the building and ending all procedures. This double standard cannot stand. On censoring dissent, Vance said, quote, EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest, the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. And Vance also noted the situation in Germany where, quote, police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online. The same has happened in Great Britain. People are in jail today in the UK for social media posts that offend the sensibilities of the global elite. Again, where was Vance wrong on the facts here? On breaking democratic norms, Vance noted this case, quote, a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election, unquote. This instinct of the global elite to annul the popular will of the people and punish their representatives is not why millions of free people fought and died on this continent in 2 horrific world wars. And it's not shameful for Vance to have said so. On mass migration, and only is the US now getting serious about this issue, Vance said this 11 months ago, quote, no voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration, unquote. Again, no matter where you stand on this issue, the theme is about honoring the idea that society runs by the consent of the governed. These statements would not even been considered controversial to those who first attended the first Davos meeting in 1971. Heck, these statements wouldn't even have been controversial from 2008 to 2012 when Davos hero Barack Obama was president of the United States. Obama, the sainted one, routinely railed against unchecked illegal immigration into the United States during his presidency. But where was the outrage then? The sins of Vance and Trump are that they committed the transgressions of stating plain truths, truths understood for generations, yet made into wholly fake vices and outrages in just the last decade or so by those who imagine themselves are moral and political betters. And what now of Trump? He is derided by the enemies of his message in the United States as Cheeto Jesus, Mango Mussolini. In the UK, he's called Trump baby sometimes. In France, as Clementine Raciste. And in Germany, as Drumpf, which happens to be his ancestral name. I often refer to him as the bad orange man. That's to characterize the unhinged reaction of our own country's elite. It's childish, uncreative, and pathetic. But one thing is clearer today, one day after his address to the World Economic Forum, than it was yesterday. Donald Trump stands as the unquestioned colossus on the world stage, and you don't have to be a fan of his to acknowledge that. The Heartland Institute has been in Zurich, Switzerland since Friday, and I can tell you that in the lead up to this meeting in Davos, all conversation was about Donald Trump. He has disrespected world leaders. He's undermining the global consensus on imposing climate communism to save the planet. He's abusing his use of tariffs. He's going to invade Greenland. Will Trump do all that? Well, my answers are yes, hell yes, maybe, and probably not, but we shall see. But the fact that Trump has dominated all discussion before he even arrived proves that he is among the only world leaders, and certainly the most powerful, who reject the elite ruling class that thought its policy dictates were inevitable and permanent. The ruling class is upset today because decades of careful planning and execution of an agenda the people of the world do not want is at risk of falling apart. It would be a catastrophe for them, but a miracle for the people, especially the people of the West. So what did Trump say yesterday? We could fill literally all 3 hours of our program today recounting it and commenting on it, but let's just go with these 3 highlights. On Greenland, Trump said, quote, "All we're asking for is to get Greenland, including right, title, and ownership, because you need the ownership to defend it." That's a bold ask, but he's not necessarily wrong. He says, "I won't use force. I don't want to use force," while noting that the United States could be unstoppable if it chose to be, and that America was stupid for returning Greenland to Denmark after World War II, calling Denmark ungrateful. Again, uncouth, but not wrong. And after all that drama, it looks like Trump has his deal after all. That's what negotiating from a position of strength will get you. Moving on, Trump also addressed European cultural shifts. Trump said, quote, "Certain places in Europe are unrecognizable. Friends come back from different places and they say, I don't recognize it. And that is not in a positive way. I want to see Europe so good, but it's not heading in the right direction," unquote. According to some media reports, WEF attendees gasped or laughed nervously. Critics viewed it as a veiled attack on multiculturalism and immigration policies. Or maybe not so veiled, because yes, it was an attack on those things. And the majority of people born in Western European countries are concerned about the pace of immigration from people who do not share the values of the country they have lived in all their lives. Same goes for Eastern Europe as well. Why is it illegitimate to talk about that? Why is it illegitimate to give voice to these people? As Vance said on a similar stage 11 months ago, ignoring the legitimate concerns of the natives of your country while also accommodating every request of those who just got there naturally breeds concern, which becomes contempt, and then it starts to get very dangerous. This policy decision by the ruling class in Europe and put on steroids in the United States during the 4 years under President Biden never had the consent of the people. Those who point that out are not the bad guys here. We need to be able to talk about this rationally and openly. Trump also addressed, I guess what he considers Europe committing energy suicide. He needled the Euro elite's embrace of so-called green energy that is ruining the economies of many countries. You might remember a previous address Trump gave in his first term at the United Nations. He warned Germany that their foolish plan to get rid of all nuclear plants, not build any more coal plants, and power their economic engine with wind and solar would be their ruination. They'd be dependent on Russian gas to survive. The German delegation openly laughed at him. But Trump was right, and they're not laughing now. All he said came to pass, and quickly. It is a good thing for Europe that this WEF visit by an American president has discredited the insane notion that the use of fossil fuels or nuclear power will destroy the planet. This president tells them the truth, that net zero by 2050 is impossible. And it's also economic suicide all the way to that myth. Maybe they will wise up, but he's doing them a service by being the bad guy here for horrible energy and economic policy. So why did Trump say what he said yesterday, and why did Vance say what he did 11 months ago in Munich? Trump and America want prosperity for the world, for anyone who is not our adversary in the world. He's not being mean. He's not being racist. He's not any phobe you want to label him. Trump is America first because he truly believes, as he said yesterday, that the stronger America is, the stronger the West is, and the better the West can protect the values of liberty, which is our God-given right, and free market economics that lift people out of poverty better than any scheme cooked up by global elites. The United States fought a war 250 years ago to throw off the yoke of one particular global elite. Trump came to Davos yesterday to remind them that, At least under his watch, the inheritors of that legacy are no longer willing to wear that yoke with a smile, now weighted down by not one monarch, but dozens. If you can look at the rhetoric and style of Trump with objectivity instead of mania and panic, you can see that Trump is the voice of people who want to be free to live their lives as they see fit, to once again truly enjoy the liberties of free speech they thought were sacrosanct, to once again have confidence that their elections are fair and free and have their desires respected and carried out by the leaders they elected to represent them. That message is righteous, economically sound, and morally correct. And the good news for the global elites is that Trump and Vance giving it straight to the world leaders in such gatherings, unlike any administration anyone can remember, is a great gift. Trump is giving the world a long overdue stress test. So gnash your teeth, rend your clothes, and put it all on the bad orange man. Use that as your excuse to once again listen to the people and remember that your predecessors in those positions, remember what your predecessors in those positions once knew. You are the temporary representatives of the people. You are not their permanent rulers. There are no permanent rulers. History has not been kind to the lives and legacies of those who thought they were a permanent ruling class. The global elite ignore that truth at their peril. But it's more than that. They're evoking the last line of America's Declaration of Independence. They are risking the lives, fortunes, and sacred honors, not just of themselves, but everyone in their societies, past, present, and future. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Thank you very much. We have a wonderful program for everyone today. Again, day 4 here in Zurich, Switzerland at the World Prosperity Forum, put on by the Heartland Institute. I hope you can go to Heartland's YouTube page and you can just look around a little bit and you can find the 3 hours of programming for each of the days that we've been here all week in Switzerland. But we have 4 more fantastic speakers today, and then we're also going to have a panel discussion at the end. And we hope if you're watching on right now on YouTube, on Rumble, on Facebook, that you will join the chat, talk with other people who love freedom and want a little bit of counter programming from what's going on at the WEF. And if you leave your questions and comments in there, we hope to get to them at the end of the program. Our speakers today are Donald Kendall. He's the director of the Glenn C. Haskins Emerging Issues Center at the Heartland Institute. We will also have Linnea Lukin, a research fellow for energy policy at Heartland. We have Stanislaus Starnowski. He's the former vice consul of Poland in New York. Cannot wait to hear that address today. And we also have Annika Sweetland, who is a UK-based energy policy advisor. And we love energy policy at the Heartland Institute, so we're looking forward to that presentation as well. But let's get the program going further along here with Donald Kendall.
All right. So forgive me. I want to start off with just a little story, I guess. Yesterday, so we're here in Zurich, Switzerland. Just a 2.5-hour train ride to the actual Davos conference. So yesterday, Linnea Lukin and I and Mark Morano from CFAC decided to go down there and see what we could see if we can ruffle some feathers, anything like that. You know, really get the full Davos man experience by going down there. Had no idea what to expect. So we went down there figuring that we would see a lot of climate activism sort of things. And it wasn't too long before we found the little climate hub, the little climate pavilion spot, which was kind of a bleak affair. I was surprised that it wasn't like the whole overarching message across the entire Davos was this climate change narrative, because that's seemingly what it's been for the last several years. So we got to this little climate hub, and we walked into where there was a little cafe with a little theater room that was real dark, and they had probably the most boring climate presentation you could ever imagine. I think we stayed in that theater for about 4 minutes before we walked out to see what else we could see. But outside, we noticed this little area where they were cooking sausages, and I was pretty hungry, and I was thinking, like, those smell pretty good, but they got to be made out of like soy and who knows what, right? Some plant-based. I can't believe it's not sausage or something like that. So we walked down. Anyways, when we were coming back from our little adventure in Davos, we stopped there, and Linnea asked the lady that was out in front of this climate hub making these delicious smelling sausages, what are these made out of? And the lady, not, English wasn't her natural language, said, baby cow? I was like, these are veal sausages? We'll have two. So just imagine Linnea and I enjoying a veal sausage in this little area just inside the climate hub. I was just thinking, man, the climate messaging is very off at Davos this year. So I'm sure Linnea can speak to that, but it seems like the bloom is off the rose when it comes to the climate agenda, even at Davos right now. But that's not what I'm up here to talk about. I just thought that was an interesting story. What I am here to talk about, my topic is actually called Socialism is Evil, which I think is the exact right track when you're talking about this sort of rhetoric. So on Monday, I was up here talking about a series of items and issues that I endearingly call 21st century collectivism. I discussed ESG, social credit scores, digital IDs, central bank-backed digital currencies. All of these things are tools that aren't necessarily socialism. However, they wield the power necessary to achieve similar collectivist goals. So I believe these items are part and parcel of the overarching Davos agenda and require much attention and criticism going forward. But these emerging issues require new thinking and research, and me and my team spend a lot of time focusing on exactly these sorts of things. However, it is important that we go back to the basics occasionally and hammer down the reemergence of socialism in its more classical form. So in this presentation, I'm going to make the case that socialism is not only a failed economic system, but more importantly, that socialism is an inherently morally corrupt worldview. So let's start off with the question of why. Why is it important that we spend this time talking about a failed economic system as opposed to some of the other emerging issues that are going on today? Prior to my center at the Heartland Institute being called the Emerging Issues Center, we were the Socialism Research Center. And despite expanding into a whole host of other topics that we keep tabs on, we still keep our finger on the pulse of socialism, looking for any signs of life. And unfortunately, over the past 12 to 18 months, we have several troubling signs that highlight a resurgence in socialism in the West. And I'm just going to mention just a few. So at the Emerging Issues Center, we have developed over the years a great relationship with Rasmussen Reports. They are a national polling organization. We regularly commission polls or surveys with Rasmussen to survey the public on a whole host of different issues, including gauging people's support of socialism and other collectivist ideas. Well, I'm displeased to tell you that the approval of socialism has seen a resurgence in these polls ever since we started doing them several years ago. And recently, we have been commissioning polls that focus specifically on younger generations between the ages of 18 and 39. And back in September, our poll results show that a staggering 53% of young voters reported that they would like to see a socialist win the presidency in 2028. Even more alarming, 76% said that they were somewhat or strongly agree that major industries like healthcare, energy, and big tech should be nationalized to give more control and equity to the people. In November, we commissioned another set of polls, and amongst these questions, we again asked likely voters about their preference for a socialist president in 2028, and we got a very similar number, with a very important additional piece of information. 42% of those surveyed who identify as conservatives said that they would like to see a democratic socialist win the presidency. 42% of those that said that they were conservatives. Another great data point pointing to the reemergence of socialism was the recent sound victory of the openly socialist Zoran Mamdani becoming mayor of New York City, the world's largest city in the United States. Despite the media's attempt to downplay his socialist beliefs, nearly every action that he's taken shows his worldview. And most recently, Mamdani appointed Sia Weaver as a housing official. Weaver has been giving interviews where she's very clearly advocating for socialist housing in New York City. And I'm not talking about just a housing program for the needy. No, I'm talking about full-on socialization of housing in New York City. So here's a direct quote from one of her interviews. "What I am envisioning is a world in which the housing is owned by a collective and people are paying 30% of their income in order to live in their housing. If your income is zero, you pay zero. If your income is $500,000 a year, you're paying 30% of that." So there's not much gray area here. This is very openly socialist as you could possibly be. And this belief seems crazy to all of us who understand the virtues of free markets, but there's an old saying, if socialists understood economics, they wouldn't be socialists. And I follow it up and say that if socialists understood history, they wouldn't be socialists. So even if we grant socialists the best possible intentions when it comes to their advocacy of socialism, the historical track record of this failed economic system could not be more clear. Despite having been attempted on every continent in a variety of different cultures and eras, socialism has failed spectacularly. In fact, it has led to chaos, bloodshed, and tyranny on an unprecedented scale. More than 167 million people have been killed, imprisoned, or exiled by socialist and communist parties over the past 120 years. So the track record is absolutely clear. We at the Heartland Institute have produced a bunch of material on this, chronicling the abhorrent history of socialism. We have the book Socialism is Evil, written by New York Times bestselling author and Heartland Vice President of Policy Justin Haskins. We have also recently produced Socialism at a Glance, which covers several case studies of socialism running its course through various countries across the planet. Justin Haskins and I have also worked with Glenn Beck on his 2020 New York Times bestselling book, Arguing with Socialists. And I'll tell you, from my experience combing through the history of socialism, you start to notice certain patterns that emerge that point to larger truths when it comes to collectivist regimes. So the first one I'll mention is the drive to change human nature. So perhaps the most critical flaw in Marx's socialism is the assumption that it is possible to convince virtually everyone to abandon their natural tendency to embrace competition and ambition. This is a core part of socialism. Socialists frame competition as a fruit of the greedy ruling class leaders' schemes and not the result of human nature. According to socialists, we compete because we believe we must. We compete because the people in charge have basically came up with a way to trick us into competing and that we don't have to do it. There's a better way. This view is proven false by virtually every aspect of the human experience. From the time children first begin to interact with each other to the moment we die, all humans experience and embrace some form of competition, even when they don't need to. For socialist regimes to break through this, they must first attempt to change human nature. You see this time and time again. In the Soviet Union, Stalin commissioned officials with the task of using psychological conditioning to create the Soviet new man. In Cambodia, Pol Pot sought to create a Cambodian master race using social engineering. In China, Mao followed in Stalin's footsteps, believing Pavlovian conditioning could help make the Chinese people act in ways desired by the ruling regime. There are several other examples of this throughout history. I'm just trying to name a few. But time and time again, when the public doesn't conform to the ideology of the socialists, the regime deem it necessary to change human nature as opposed to just the acknowledgement that socialism is incongruent with human nature. Which brings me to my next pattern. You see this throughout socialist history, and that is the idea of doubling down in the face of failure. The population doesn't act according to socialist dogma. Engineer a new population that does. And if a socialist program fails to achieve its goal, that isn't a reflection on whether or not that program was good in the first place. We just need to push harder and harder for that success. And oftentimes that means increased authoritarianism. In 1956, the Chinese government under Mao Zedong claimed to want to increase the freedom of speech. inviting criticism of the Communist Party under a campaign called the 100 Flowers. The idea of this was to let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend. Sounds great, right? You may not have even heard about this. The idea that the communist Mao regime was advocating for free speech. Well, the reason you haven't heard about it is because it didn't last very long. Eventually, the communist regime in China grew tired of criticism, ended the campaign, and started throwing their political opponents in prison and forced labor camps. This sort of thing is standard throughout socialist regimes. Sometimes this pattern takes a very weird track too, and unexpected turns. My favorite example of this is the rabbit plan in Venezuela. So as socialism took hold in Venezuela, of course, food shortages and hunger followed. So in response, did Nicolas Maduro reestablish market principles? No, of course not. Instead, the regime instituted the so-called rabbit plan, which encouraged citizens to raise and breed rabbits for their animal protein. The government actually began to provide communities with baby bunnies that they could raise, breed, and eventually eat. The program was then beset by a new problem. People in Venezuela started to treat the animals like pets. They started giving them names. They started dressing them up. They started treating them like they were part of the family. So you might think, well, the government would say, oh, well, that was a bad idea. Maybe we should try something else. No, of course not. They double down. Instead, the Minister of Urban Agriculture suggested an educational campaign to make the rabbit plan effective. To rectify the problem, the minister said, quote, "We need a publicity campaign on radio, TV, in newspapers, in cartoons, everywhere, so that the people understand that rabbits aren't pets, but instead 2.5 kilos of meat." So at the beginning, you would never have thought that a food program would require a countrywide propaganda campaign to convince people to eat their pets. But there you have it. Another pattern is the need to scapegoat groups of people when the goals of the regime fail. Oftentimes, the regime will label people as saboteurs. It's not possible that our ideas are flawed and will inevitably lead to disaster. It must be that we are a victim of sabotage and that those responsible must be held accountable. This pattern is the one that leads most directly to overt repression and the savagery that we've seen in failing totalitarian regimes across the world. But as I discussed in the beginning of my talk on Monday, the greatest economic flaw of the socialist worldview is the attempt to centralize economic decision-making, replacing the combined will of millions of individuals with the demands of a central authority. Regardless of how much power an authoritarian regime takes, it cannot possibly replace basic core economic concepts like price signals, price equilibrium, supply and demand, and basic voluntary markets of exchange. It just cannot do that. But here's the mistake that we often find ourselves on the free market advocate side of this debate. We stop there. We say that socialism doesn't work, and then we think that settles the issue. For a lot of young people today, it doesn't, because they're not looking for a system that works most efficiently. They're looking for a system that feels fair. And to many, this debate is a morality issue. And that is why I think it's important not only to explain why socialism fails, but why it is inherently morally corrupt. So this is where I want to kind of slow down a little bit, because I feel like this is the part of the debate that isn't had as often as some of the other things that I've talked about. When it comes to the track record of socialism, the evil outcomes are very clear. Whether it's the result of socialist policy-induced food shortages causing mass starvation, or the intentional starvation of specific populations, or regimes explicitly murdering political dissidents, the human carnage is off the charts. 65 million in China, 20 to 30 million in the Soviet Union, 15 to 20 million in Nazi Germany, 1 to 3 million in North Korea, 2 million in Cambodia, 1.6 million in Vietnam, 400,000 in Romania, 100,000 in Cuba, and on it goes. So you would think these numbers alone would cause people to rethink their support for socialism, and in many it does, but there is another problem out there, and that's the idea that students simply are not taught these things in schools. They're talked about the virtues of a what is it? A collaborative economic model that's a mixed economy, I think is what they call it. But for many, there is a hubris, and this is the problem. There's a hubris that this time it can be different, or worse. If I was in charge of tomorrow's socialist regime, I would be benevolent, unlike all those monsters of history. So we have to bypass these responses and explain the moral failures of socialism up front. The first moral failure of socialism, and I think that this is a foundational one, is this. When the government managed everything, everything becomes political. Now, this might sound obvious at first, but the implications are enormous. In a free society, there are wide areas of life that are deliberately kept outside of politics. This include your job, your purchases, your lifestyle choices, your moral beliefs. All of these things we consider personal. Most of these things are worked out voluntarily between individuals, families, churches, communities, and markets. Under socialism, that private space disappears. When the state owns or controls the major sectors of society, every decision becomes a collective decision. And collective decisions are, by definition, political decisions. There is no longer a meaningful private sphere. There is no longer a place where you can say, well, that's my responsibility, it's my choice, so it's my risk, so leave me alone. That disappears. Instead, every choice you make is subject to public debate, public pressure, and eventually public enforcement. And this is where socialism becomes something more dangerous than just an efficient economic model. Because once everything is political, moral disagreement becomes political conflict. If you and I disagree in a free society, we can go our separate ways. We can choose our own services and goods we want to buy. We can decide to live in different communities. But in a socialist collective society, there is no going your separate ways. If the state manages healthcare, housing, energy, education, transportation, then disagreement isn't just disagreement anymore. It's a fight over who controls the system. And that means politics invades every part of our life. Your values, priorities, your behavior all become subject to public approval. That's why socialism cannot tolerate moral pluralism for very long. Socialism requires consensus. And when consensus doesn't emerge voluntarily, it has to be enforced, which brings us to the simple but unsettling truth. There is no neutral ground in a fully collectivized society. You are either aligned with the collective decisions or you are standing in the way of them. And once that line is crossed, the system no longer treats you as an individual with a conscience, but a problem that needs to be managed. That is the logic of socialism working exactly as intended. So let's talk about how this applies to healthcare, because healthcare is one of the most commonly defended socialist proposals, the idea of socializing healthcare. When healthcare is fully socialized, the argument goes like this. Everyone pays in and everyone benefits. Sounds compassionate, sounds fair. But when the part that rarely gets mentioned is that when costs are socialized, behavior becomes a public concern. Your health is no longer just your responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. Your choices are no longer just your business. They're everybody's business. Your risks are no longer yours to bear because now everyone is paying for them. And once that happens, the public begins to claim moral authority over your behavior. Whether it's the diet, if you choose a diet that's considered unhealthy, whether or not you exercise vigorously, whether or not you smoke multiple cigars, James Taylor, whether or not you have your occasional drink, it all is a burden that has to be bared by the rest of the collective. So it's no longer just your body that you're inflicting any potential damage on. What begins as free healthcare quietly becomes a social permission structure. This is the logical outcome of shifting responsibility away from the individual into the collective. At that point, the question shifts from, is this your choice, to, should the rest of us be forced to pay for it? And once that question is accepted, enforcement is never far behind. This is how socialism transforms personal responsibility into public regulation. What began as a proposal to pool resources turns into the necessity to pool moral judgment. And the principle underneath all of this is simple. If everyone pays, everyone gets a vote and eventually a veto. And that veto doesn't just apply to policy, it applies to you and your lifestyle, and it applies to your personal autonomy. This is control justified by collective obligation. And it is one of the clearest examples of how socialism converts private responsibility into public enforcement. And once socialism has erased the private sphere, and once it has turned personal responsibility into public enforcement, there is one final moral consequence that follows. Collective ownership means collective moral responsibility. This is the part of socialism that almost never gets talked about, but it is probably the most dangerous of all. In a free society, if you believe something is wrong, you can refuse to participate in it. You can opt out, withhold your support. You could say, I don't want this in my name. Socialism does not allow for this. Under socialism, participation is mandatory. So let me give you a fairly simple example. Imagine a vegan who believes that it is morally repugnant to kill animals. Not talking about just a preference or something. We're talking about like a deeply held moral conviction. In a socialist system where agriculture is collectively owned, that person is now part owner of a slaughterhouse. They may object and protest and vote against it, but at the end of the day, they are still directly morally entangled in something they believe fundamentally is wrong. Their opposition doesn't absolve them. Their conscience doesn't exempt them, because collective ownership means shared responsibility, whether you consent to that or you don't. And once you see that, the problem becomes impossible to ignore. And this doesn't just apply to agriculture or food or whether or not you think meat should be a part of everyone's diet. This applies to essentially everything. Under socialism, you don't get to just say, I disagree, so I won't participate. Your labor funds it. Your taxes support it. Your name as a member of the collective is attached to it. And that is the profound moral violation, because conscience only has meaning if it allows refusal. A system that denies moral exit reorders morality itself. It tells you that your deepest convictions are subordinate to whatever the collective decides at any given moment. And once that line is crossed, freedom no longer exists in any meaningful sense. Freedom is the ability to say no, and socialism removes that right entirely. You are no longer to say, not in my name. At this point, the system claims ownership over your conscience. So let me close with this. The real divide here is not compassion versus cruelty. It's not fairness versus greed. It is freedom versus the collective. A free society does not require us to agree on everything. We can have moral disagreement. We have voluntary association. A free society allows people to live according to their conscience, to choose, to refuse, and to walk away if we feel necessary. This is the great strength of a free society. Socialism cannot tolerate that kind of pluralism. It demands unity at the cost of liberty. It demands participation at the cost of conscience. And once a system reaches the point where moral dissent is treated as a threat, freedom utterly collapses. So this is why socialism is not merely just a flawed and inefficient economic system. It's a system that cannot tolerate moral dissent. And that means it's dangerous. And yes, at its roots, that means it is evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald. Very good address. I appreciate that. And just reminding everybody on the stream that at the end of the presentations today, we're going to have some Q&A, and I really hope we're going to I have some questions about what happened in Davos with two of our delegation down there yesterday. That should be a lot of fun. But let me first now welcome up our next speaker. That's Stanislaw Starnawski. He is the former vice consul of Poland in New York. And he's a former assistant director at the Chancellery of the Prime Minister of Poland, and he's a strategic and PR advisor. And the Poles have freedom in their blood, always have, always will. And I am looking forward to his remarks today. So please welcome Stanislaw Starnawski.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Um, they say there are two kinds of people: one that actually can speak without notes, and those who care about making a compelling argument. So I guess I'm not in the first category. So forgive me if I glance at my notes from time to time, and it's more for your benefit than mine. So thank you for having me here. Kudos to Heartland Institute, James. Thank you for the invitation and this hosting such a great initiative. So I have flown in from Washington D.C. this morning, but in every meaningful sense, I'm from Poland. And Poland is maybe you don't know that, but Poland is actually one of the most, not only one of the most pro-American societies, but also one of the most pro-European countries on the continent. Yet more and more Poles feels that this day and age, this is not the Europe we've been rejoining decades ago, with the number of critics in Poland of the EU at record highs. So what happened? That even a nation of unapologetic optimists for European cooperation has started to question the current shape of the EU. Well, one obvious answer is the current Brussels political and administrative apparatus, with its unlimited desire for more influence through unchecked institutional expansion and ideological pressure, obviously. And probably no one has experienced more harshly what happens when you try to oppose such overreach than conservatives in Poland over the last decade. But I think I wouldn't find too many people in this room today among us defending Brussels bureaucracy or its political elites. It's they are not a particularly tempting target for me, right? People, including politicians, they come and go, and I hope that the personal lineup of Brussels decision makers will hopefully change as national elections roll on. For me, the more important question remains: was the very idea of peaceful cooperation between European nations flawed from the beginning, or did something change along the way? I hinted at the answer at the title of my speech. So, how to restore the European cooperation? But maybe you think that the idea of European integration was always doomed, or if it wasn't, it's too late now to save it. Well, I want to argue otherwise, and why this is important. Why our friends from United States are here willing to hear the detailed institutional account of European Union? Because despite its flaws, I deeply believe that Europe is worth saving. Because what's at stake if nothing less than the survival of world built on values shared by the United States and Europe. Values like liberty, sovereignty, prosperity, and peace. And well, let's be honest, right? For too long, Europe has been a free rider. During the Cold War, during the Cold War, it relied on the U.S. security umbrella. After the fall of the communism, it benefited from free trade and global alliances without contributing proportionally to the maintaining them. And what happens when you don't have skin in the game? You lose touch with the reality. You start to believe that the good times are permanent, that prosperity is automatic, and the peace is a given. This is one of the reasons why Europe drifted into centralization and bureaucracy. The founding principles of European integration, prosperity, freedom, and peace, became slogans in too many cases. Instead of improving citizens' lives and expanding their scope of freedoms, the EU narrative became one of overreach. How does it manifest? For years, the Union pursued three dominant policies: an overextended welfare state, a rigid climate policy, and near total neglect of security. When anyone questioned these priorities, They were met with severe political pushback, as we saw in Poland during conservative government. And these policies led to a situation in which Europe is right now. So losing competitiveness and capital as key industries and technologies move to Asia. Losing security, losing social cohesion due to poorly managed immigration, losing global influence. So instead of focusing on innovation, defense, economy, the EU has been choosing centralization and top-down regulation. But fortunately, one thing is slowly changing. Europe is starting to understand at least one thing, that taking more responsibility for security is necessary, that the free riding on defense is no longer an option. Obviously, it did not happen without a little push by the US, as Mark Rutte said, I believe yesterday, I quote, President Donald Trump has forced us in Europe to step up, to face up the consequences that we have to take care of more of our own defense. This means reaching 2% GDP spending on defense and agreeing on 5% GDP in the future. But I'm Polish, and I must give some justice to my country. Poland has long been a minority voice calling for stronger European defense capacities, and actually was living up to that commitment. But even with this positive development on the security, it creates a new dilemma, as the defense policy places yet another financial pressure on European nations. It creates a dilemma that one of my mentors, a long-time Prime Minister of Poland, called Europe's impossible trinity. So the EU is trying to do three things at once: maintain a generous welfare state, ramp up defense spending, and aggressively pursue climate goals. Not all three are worth pursuing. All three are expensive, and in their current form, they are incompatible. We can't have it all. And frankly speaking, even if we could, as we sit in this room, my educated guess, knowing a little bit about Heartland Institute, is that we simply don't want at least some of these three, right? So what must go first is security, free markets, and innovation. Climate goals, especially when pursued ideologically, risk pushing industry out of Europe. Europe needs to be a Europe of freedom, not for forced convergence. We say yes to single market, but no to ideological coercion. Let nations decide and choose their development path in energy, climate policy, migration, and policy. Those who want deeper integration in some areas are free to pursue it, but without imposing it on others. If the West is to remain strong, we must strengthen the transatlantic ties, merge economic and security agendas, and build a free trade and technology alliance between Europe and the United States. This would be the strongest possible counterweight to China and other emerging blocs. But this requires political courage and change. As nations, we must stop outsourcing our decision making to Brussels elites, stop the ongoing overreach of EU institutions, and start shaping our own future. So either Europe wakes up and chooses competitiveness, security, and freedom, or it becomes a peripheral player for the first time in centuries. Donald Kendall has delivered a great speech on socialism. Well, the Poles don't need this kind of reminder on socialism because it runs as an experience quite fresh in our blood and in our memory. But one thing you need to understand, why the Poles were so eager to join the EU. Exactly because 20, 30, 40 years ago, EU and United Europe stand for freedom, for liberty, as a counterweight to the socialism. And we just need to return to these ideas. At the root of the European project, there was a simple idea: cooperation among free nations, preserving peace and liberty through shared prosperity, individual rights, and free markets. Ideas like common market or four freedoms of EU, and they are still deeply rooted in the European project. These values dear to us, like prosperity and freedom, are still at reach. They might be dusty, but they are not lost in Europe. And now, maybe one last caveat. Let's be realistic. The United States won't build a new international order together with Russia, and Europe will not thrive long term if it aligns with China. We can accept these truths, or we can learn them the hard way. Europe and the United States just need each other. I'm honored to speak at this American-European meeting, and I truly believe that to preserve the Western way of life, America needs a stronger Europe. But maybe even more importantly, Europe needs it even more. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those insights. I'm looking forward to the Q&A at the end of this program. Many questions came to mind, many comments came to mind, and fantastic address. Appreciate that. So next on the program is going to be the Heartland Institute's Linnea Lucan. She's going to be talking about climate alarmism climate science versus alarmism, or another way to put it, I guess, is climate alarmism versus the scientific reality. Linnea is a research fellow at the Heartland Institute. She's the host of the In the Tank podcast, which you can watch streaming on these very channels every Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and also a participant in a show I get to host called the Climate Realism Show, where she's part of that program as well. But before she comes up, another thing that was interesting about the WEF that I was learning as we've been here since Friday, since right before it started. And one of the trends has been, if you've been following the World Economic Forum for years, the climate issue has been dominant at the WEF for such a long time. And there's a good reason for that, because it was the perfect avenue for control. If you control energy production based on the idea that human activity is causing a global climate crisis from which we will all perish, and that the whole ecosystems will be completely overwhelmed and destroyed. If the stakes are that, well, then there's some justification there for not just a little bit of control over our economies, but complete control over economies and thus the people. It's been kind of striking. It's still a topic around here in Switzerland and in Davos, but all the stories I've read, all the trends I've seen on social media, there's been two topics that have been talked about a lot more than climate this year: Donald Trump and AI. And so we're probably going to get into that in the Q&A today. It would be interesting because we have a wonderful AI expert in Donald Kendall, and I'd like to welcome our wonderful climate science expert, Linnea Lucan. Come on up.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. This is a topic that I just made a really loud noise with that. A topic that I get to talk about all the time on the Climate Realism Show and also in my work writing for climaterealism.com. But it's kind of evergreen. And as Jim said, it's declining at the World Economic Forum, but it's not going away. As we heard at one of the talks that we sat in on really briefly because it was kind of boring. They're talking about how they want to continue to do these sustainability pushes in finance, but make it more under the radar. So it's definitely not going away, which is why I would like to talk a little bit about the kind of perception of climate change that you get from the media versus what the actual data says. So we have talked a lot about climate change during this World Prosperity Forum. And like I said, it's for very good reason. alarmism, the promotion, the idea that human beings' activities on the planet are causing dangerous global warming, which drives, supposedly all manner of weather disasters and ecological breakdown. This has all been a major vehicle for, as Jim explained, promoting the agenda of our friends up the road in Davos. As Jim said, again, after all, if the world is in danger of coming to an end, many actions would be justified to save it. But you need to get the general public, even if all of that was true, you need to get the general public on board, and also politicians who prefer to rely on the experts. You need to get them all to believe in the danger, right? And nothing has been more successful in that particular mission than the mainstream media. Both sides of the Atlantic, really around the world, from the Associated Press to the Guardian, the propaganda machine has been incredibly thorough. No one knows this better than my colleagues here at the Heartland Institute, and our allies, of course, in the fight against environmental extremism. And I don't think that there has been a single extreme weather event, or even just bad weather event, or slightly unpleasant weather event, whether it's a heat wave or a cold snap like they're seeing across the United States and in Russia, snowstorms, which everyone is dealing with right now, it seems, drought, wildfire conditions, all of it is immediately connected to climate change. So I'll give you a quick example of how crazy some of this rhetoric has gotten before I get into all my other examples. But so in Chicago, along with many other cities, especially in the United States, Midwestern states, there's kind of this long-standing joke that's older than I am, of course, that says, if you don't like the weather here, wait an hour or two and it'll change. That's been a joke forever, and I'm positive that similar comments are made in Europe and other countries around the world. Basically everywhere outside of the south of France has bad weather, right? The south of France has the Mistral, but everywhere else you get bad weather, and it used to be just kind of a common commentary on how weather can change very quickly. Well, nowadays, media sensationalism would call this, wait for the weather to change joke an indicator of weather whiplash, which is very scary. And I do have some slides for this presentation. Jim, do we have the weather whiplash one up?
We do now.
Okay, wonderful. So this is my proof that they call it weather whiplash now, which is very scary, of course. And some places have just stronger swings in weather conditions completely naturally than others. And it's different from one year to the next, even. So it's very silly to try to frighten people with this, but they do. And for a while, it has worked. So I'm going to talk a little bit here about how the media talks about climate and what the data actually says. The media says we are seeing unprecedented, rapid, dangerous warming. It's too fast, and every time it's a little bit hot in the summer or kind of mild in a winter, it's proof that this warming is out of control. But what does the data say? Slide. Okay. What has warming actually looked like so far? Well, nothing like the emergency portrayed by media. We see about 0.13 degrees per decade. A lot of the alarming stuff that you see is not actually based on measured temperatures, but projected modeled temperatures. So the right-hand chart here that's up on screen shows the accuracy of those models compared to measured temperatures. The red line is the model mean of hundreds of those models, while these other lines are measured from satellites, radio sonde measurements, and ground sensors. This is what's known as the hot model problem, because these overly hot models are what's driving the panic that's beginning to stomp on all of us, or that has been stomping on all of us. And I want to point out too that the temperature spikes that you can see in both of these charts, a lot of these are really interesting because they align very well with another natural phenomenon called the El Nino, which are also, again, natural, and they spike global temperatures. Next slide. In the United States, there hasn't been a whole lot of warming. hardly any at all, actually. The red is just a different measurement data set on the screen. And if you zoom in on that data set, next slide, which starts in about 2004, we get a different trend, or no trend, really. It's basically flat. So this is the best data set. It does not have interference from urban heat island effect that others do, and it shows a lot less warming than those too. So next time your local news, though, declares some kind of a massive heat spike, especially if they claim that it's a record high, go look up the measurement station that record was taken from. 9 times out of 10, it's at an airport. So if that doesn't tell you how bad some of this data collection is. But we shouldn't be surprised to see average temperatures change over time. They always have. Next slide. So here's the paleo record using proxies for temperature. So they're not direct measurements. We don't have any thermometers out there when mammoths were roaming around, but it's the best that we've got. And we are about as warm now as we were in the medieval period, still cooler than the Roman period as we exit what was known as the Little Ice Age. But who cares about average temperatures, especially global average temperature? Because average temperatures don't burn my house down, and they also don't flood it. But weather can, especially extreme weather. So next slide. The news says that weather, like the kind of weather that contributes to wildfires, hurricanes, and drought, is all getting worse. But the data says that those things are not getting worse. With regards to drought, next slide. For example, very few places in the United States are seeing a trend in declining precipitation. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, our friends at the UN there, say that they have high confidence that precipitation has actually increased over the mid-latitudes of the Northern Hemisphere during the past 70 years, and has low confidence about any negative trends at all on a global scale. There is one kind of drought, though, which is partially human-caused, but again, that has nothing to do with climate change, and that's what's called hydrological drought, which occurs when reservoirs and bodies of water are drawn down too much. And again, it's not because it's raining less in those places, but it's actually because there are more and more people living and playing golf on beautiful green golf courses in the California desert. So when you do have a drought, when you have a legitimate long-term drought period in an area that was not made to have that many people and that much water use, you do get a real drought, and it becomes a real issue. But again, that's not some long-term global warming problem. That's a human infrastructure problem. So what about wildfires? Next slide. Globally, again, data show that wildfires have been trending downwards in terms of global burned area. So just in the last 18 years, the area burned up by wildfires has fallen by around 18%. And this past summer, there were many reports saying that various European countries were having unprecedented wildfires. The media was extremely excited to report on this. And I'm also excited to report on this because it's something that a lot of people would not have the background to look into. But actually, the European Space Agency has satellites that they work in conjunction with the United States, gathering data with. And those satellites show us what's going on with wildfires. So this September, the Associated Press claimed that climate change was causing worse wildfires in places like Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus. But not only were these fires not unprecedented, they also were not part of a longer trend in terms of fire extent. So we have a next slide that shows the European Space Agency's Copernicus data on wildfires across Europe. And I pulled up the ones from Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus here for you to look at. And it's not a super long database because we haven't had satellites that can do this up for very long. But we can see from that data that there is no trend in wildfire occurrence or severity in these countries. One bad year does not a climate trend make. And it's a little bit embarrassing, I think, for the media when they don't bother to report on that, unless, of course, you're assuming that they do it on purpose. Some of the decline in global wildfires almost certainly has to do with innovations in detecting them in the first place, like those satellite surveys. You know, you can look at wildfire extent live via satellite nowadays, but you are also contending with an increase in the number of people who are in fire-prone areas, more people setting fires accidentally by dragging a chain behind a truck or something, making sparks, or not watching the grill close enough, and also intentional arson. And that's just because there are more people living in areas that are already prone to catching fire, and yet the decline in global wildfire persists. So how about hurricanes? That is one of the media's absolute favorite fear-mongering subjects because hurricanes are extremely dangerous, they're extremely damaging, and they can hurt a lot of people in a relatively short amount of time. So I have heard constantly from the media that hurricanes are getting worse. Every time a hurricane causes any damage anywhere, they find some kind of metric that they claim is worse now than before, whether it's wind speed, or when they find out that the wind speed isn't actually getting worse, they say that it's rainfall. When they see that the rainfall isn't actually getting worse, they say, well, the speed of the storm's intensity or movement, any number of things. And of course, you know, a thinking person can look at all of this, all these different elements that go into a hurricane and realize that you can always find something uniquely bad about any given storm. It's just bad logic and bad science, and also bad reporting to go digging for differences so that you can amplify them to generate fear. So this chart that I have shows the global frequency of hurricanes, major ones, and also all the rest. And there is no trend, but, you know, maybe they're getting stronger. And then the next slide I have here shows a chart that shows accumulated cyclone energy of hurricanes in both hemispheres, which is a measure of hurricane strength. And again, there's no trend. The only trends that we might be seeing, again, are emerging trends in hurricanes that stay out to sea for longer. But again, that's tough to call because 100 plus years ago, we didn't have every inch of the planet watched 24/7 from space. So there were a lot of storms that we simply did not know about and are not on the record. So the way that I have described this issue in the past is kind of like if you go to the doctor and get all of your spots and freckles and everything mapped out one day, and then you start obsessively cataloging every new speck, and you become very alarmed at the unprecedented number of new specks that you are finding popping up or disappearing on your skin, both equally scary. This month, you know, there's 2 more freckles on me than last month. And so at this rate, I will be nothing but speckles well before 2030. Catastrophe, right? Well, you weren't looking before, so calm down. It's okay. Another trend that might be happening with hurricanes is that they come later in the season or are a little bit more to the west in the Gulf. Again, there just isn't enough data yet to be sure of any solid trend. And recall that we've only had satellites up there doing weather stuff consistently since about the 1980s. So I do keep hearing, though, if our next slide is available, about these billion-dollar disasters. The media loves to talk about the increasing cost of supposed effects from climate change. And why not? Costs are rising, or at least they seem to be. But you have to ask, how many multi-million-dollar mansions were in remote wilderness areas, barrier islands along coastlines, and in developing nations in the year 1900 or 1980 for that matter, you know, compared to today? There are now more people in disaster-prone areas with much higher property values, higher inflation, and the expansion of building in what used to be considered poor locations as the better locations get filled up. Even then, when you calculate disaster costs as a proportion of GDP, next slide, during this period where we have supposedly had the worst impact from climate change, you can see the trend. And that trend is that there is no trend, or it could even be falling. But you rarely hear about the kind of measured weather data that I've just shown you here in the mainstream sources, maybe every once in a while. But often the media will not mention any measured data at all. Instead, they fearmonger and they use news article in their news articles. They have a great friend by the name of a rapid single event attribution study. Next slide, please. You can tell when a story is leaning very heavily, not on measured data, but on a single event attribution study when they have titles like this one from physics.org, which says, "Climate change significantly worsened deadly 2022 Durban flood study shows." The BBC, "Deadly Dubai floods are made worse by climate change." CNN, "The climate crisis made Australia's wildfires at least 30% more likely," study finds. And another from CNN, "Without climate change, these extreme weather events would not have happened." There are probably hundreds of stories with this formula. X event was made Y times worse because of climate change, or X event would not have happened without climate change. How do they know that? Well, it's actually pretty incredible what a farce these studies are, actually. A single event attribution study compares two models of the world. Both of these models are counterfactual, as in not accurate to real life. So they take one model where they assume that global warming never happened because humans never started burning fossil fuels, and they compare it to another one that they claim is a model of how today actually is. The problem is both of these have assumptions built in. One of those assumptions is that the weather event they're isolating was worsened by global warming. They assume that, had it not been for human-caused warming, the individual storm would not have been so severe, one way or another. They also assume that a universe without human-caused warming would not result in severe storms, or as severe of storms. In fact, this is what the Associated Press reported on regarding the wildfires in Cyprus and saying that they were caused by climate change. They did not reference the Copernicus data that I showed you. They referenced the study by World Weather Attribution. WWA are not unbiased researchers. The entire reason for their existence is specifically to attribute different extreme weather events to alleged human-caused climate change. They believe, actually, that the United Nations IPCC is too moderate and cautious with their apocalyptic predictions. So these so-called studies assume that climate change caused or contributed to an extreme event. The only question they ask is, how much more likely was that event to occur, or how much more severe was it than it would have been had humans never used fossil fuels? So this is pure propaganda. They do not look at any other explanations. The only one that they're interested in is the human-caused climate angle. And so, as I've demonstrated here, it's all over the news. They love these things. And the history of these attribution studies is actually that they were designed to lend force to lawsuits against oil companies for their contribution to increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide. Organizations like the World Weather Attribution say that this led to warming, which then they say then leads to more severe weather. So they are attempting to blame particular oil companies for bad weather, which is nuts, but that's what these studies are for. So we've seen, though, that the measured data just does not demonstrate more severe weather. So what's the result then of all of this bad reporting on climate science and on the weather? Many people feel terrified every single day. Media reporting has been so dramatic and frightening that people, especially the very young, children, believe that the world is literally going to end in short order. Reasonably, if you believe that falsehood, you will become anxious and depressed. And so you might think that the media would want to bury that because it's clearly their fault, right? They are the ones who are exaggerating and lying by omission when they are not outright lying. But they don't. They have a different strategy for reporting on climate anxiety, and that is that they blame it on climate change. Slide. So, given all that I've shown here, the question that I have for a lot of the climate alarmists in the media, peddling, in all of this fear, is this. Next slide. Would the people living in areas that are naturally already prone to natural disasters like wildfires and hurricanes and floods and snowstorms, all of it, be better off if we left oil and gas and coal in the ground and if we deindustrialized? If we didn't use those resources in order to make cement and steel, or to power generators when a storm knocks out the grid, stable electricity in general for, two things that greatly increased our resilience to extreme temperatures, like those in the United States right now with their extreme cold snap, the cold way up here in the mountains of Switzerland, or extreme heat, are heating and air conditioning. Neither of those at scale are possible without fossil fuels. What about the casing on electric car batteries and long-term storage batteries themselves? Solar cells? The materials used to make wind turbine blades, not to mention transporting them cross-country? On what tires would you do that? Weatherproofing materials, fuel for rescue vehicles, new advanced plastics and other materials that can be used for any number of medical or construction uses. None of these things would exist without the use of fossil fuels. So what media alarmists are doing is they're arguing that the weather is worse when it's not, and that giving up your standard of living is the way to save yourself, which is absurd. Even if the weather was getting worse, giving up the products that we need, which have massively decreased fatalities due to the weather, would definitely not help. Actual measured data does not show that we are in the midst of a climate emergency, despite what members of the mainstream media claim. They can use attribution studies to skirt around the lack of data supporting their position, but those studies are a fantasy. They are made up. They are made up specifically for the purpose of scaring you about the weather. No one is trying to read the news to get falsehoods. So no one trying to read the news should pay them any mind when it comes to the climate issue. In fact, taking a knee-jerk skeptical position on all media coverage of the weather and climate is probably the most rational position at this point. The media is not trying to educate us about the facts regarding weather and climate. Instead, they take advantage of the volatility and danger of the natural world that surrounds us, and they point to it as a reason why we should all just fall in line and let people like those at the World Economic Forum this week tell us how to live our lives, and that we should just tolerate living with less, as one sign that I saw in the Climate Hub this weekend proudly promoted. Not that global elites enjoying Davos will ever end up sacrificing any of this themselves. After all, they really do enjoy going to that beautiful ski resort and having wonderful veal, wonderful veal bratwurst. So why should you listen to them, especially when the media is just lying for them? Thank you.
Thank you, Linnea Lukin. Fantastic talk. Just as a reminder for those just tuning in today, I'm James Taylor, president of the Heartland Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Switzerland remotely. It's a little bit better in person, but hopefully you're getting the flavor of Switzerland here at our event. What's really interesting with Linnea's talk, and by the way, her information, her slides that are so compelling, much of that she has made available and we have made available at climateataglance.com. It's a publication. You can actually purchase the physical version of it on amazon.com. You can download it for free at climateataglance.com. We even have an app on your cell phone. So you can download the app, and anytime that somebody who is not well informed tries to tell you that hurricanes are getting worse or droughts are getting worse, in 10 seconds, you have it right there with you without having to carry a book around. But it calls to mind back in the days when climate alarmists, climate activists would actually debate, would actually show up for a discussion and competing of ideas, and also of presentations on hopefully facts. When I was scheduled for these debates, it's funny how it is. I quickly learned that there were three types of people that I would often be debating. One would be university professors in climate science. And often it would be the most prestigious names in the climate science field. And as I prepare for the debate, initially, I would get a little bit nervous. This person's going to know everything there is to know about climate science. We have differing opinions. Boy, I hope I can reasonably hold my own. The next would be people who work for the government, scientists at NASA and NOAA, who again, as I'm preparing for our talk, our panel, our debate, I'm getting nervous, at least at first. These people, these must be the cream of the crop. They must know everything there is to know about climate science because they work at NASA, they work at NOAA. And I want to make sure I can hold my own. And then occasionally I would be lined up to debate against a counterpart of mine at Greenpeace or World Wildlife Fund or whatever else. And what I quickly learned was that the easiest debates for me, the ones that I learned I didn't even need to prepare extra for, was when I was debating the climate scientist, especially a big name climate scientist, or the NASA NOAA scientist. Now, look, there are exceptions to the rule. There are some very good scientists in both places. In fact, we have scientists there, such as my friend Stan Goldenberg, who is with NOAA. But by and large, if I'm debating somebody on climate science, what would typically happen would be this. I would present much of the data like Linnea has shown. And they would talk in these grandiose terms about how the climate is changing and watts per square meter of the atmosphere and all that. And then I would say, that's a good theory, but what about this data that your organization, that NASA has produced, showing just the opposite of what you're claiming or predicting? What about this peer-reviewed study? And I would know these by heart. Many of them I still do because I want to make sure that I'm well-informed, that I can present my case properly, and if I'm wrong, that I can become right. And these so-called experts, the professors, the scientists at NASA, NOAA, their eyes would glaze over. They would have no idea that this data, that this information existed. They're in these echo chambers. They're taught to think one thing. They're speaking with their own colleagues who have not been exposed to anything different. The only time that would be remotely challenging is when I would be debating somebody at the activist group who has a reason to make sure that they're not going to get defeated in a debate, in a public debate. Of course, they still got defeated because the facts are on our side. Oftentimes I would hear, well, they just have the best mouthpieces that money can buy, as if like it's by some coincidence that, well, it's not really the facts or the data that you always lose your debates. It's just that by facts, coincidence, maybe a conspiracy, that the best speakers and debaters are climate realists, skeptics, however you want to describe them. And I was thinking of that recently. I met this very impressive climate scientist, and we began talking at an event, and she was presenting ideas and information that was very impressive. I could tell this person was well-educated, well-schooled, knew what she was talking about. I mean, very impressive. In fact, shortly thereafter, she sent me a paper in which she had mapped out and documented and explained the various climate cycles, temperature cycles in history, how they came about, the extent of their impact. And I thought, wow, this person really knows her stuff. And the thing that was, I mean, this is a high quality, this is a person who knows her stuff. This is a top-notch climate scientist. And as we've corresponded some, the interesting part is that every now and then we'll discuss a topic, some of the topics that Linnea discussed. And she would say, wow, when I was getting my schooling, when I was getting my climate science degree, this never came up. I mean, you would think that in an institution that's teaching you to be a climate scientist, that gives degrees for being a climate scientist, that is producing climate scientists like our next speaker, you would think that they'd at least be exposed to it. And somebody who impressed me immediately as a very knowledgeable, very impressive climate scientist, as we've communicated, I'm thinking, wow, this is a person who genuinely wants to know. If there are things that she's not being taught in college, getting her degree, she wants to know. And she's becoming, well, I don't know if I can say becoming an even better climate scientist because she's amazing. But anyway, she felt compelled to tell everyone out here today in the audience, folks here in this room, about her experiences of in her climate science education, in her climate science discussions, what has been said, what she has been taught, what she's learned, and how she's applied it. It's amazingly impressive. And now what folks aren't being said. So when you see the talking heads, when you see the folks quoted in the media as these climate scientists, what even they have not been exposed to. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you climate scientist who has worked for the Australian government in energy policy, very impressive, Annika Sweetland.
When I was 19, I would lie awake at night, trying to calculate how old I would be when the food shortages hit, where I should live one day to avoid the sea level rise, where it would be safe to live in 20 years' time, whether it was even ethical to bring a child into the world I genuinely believed was going to collapse due to unavoidable, catastrophic climate change. And the strangest part is that no one had made me think this with violence, no one had threatened me, all they had done is teach me. My name is Annika Sweetland, and I trained as a climate scientist. And during my time in what was meant to be a world-class education, I learned the world was a fragile system on the brink of collapse and that we were practically doomed. What sets me apart from most climate scientists is this. I've realized I was indoctrinated. Going through my old lecture notes now, I see lie after lie after lie, painting a picture that does not and will not ever exist. I was that girl that ticked the box when booking a plane ticket to say, yes, I'm willing to pay a higher price to make this an environmentally friendly transaction and offset my carbon emissions. Airlines saving polar bears, sign me up. But of course, the consensus was always the same. There was nothing I could really do to solve the climate crisis. So let me take you through my journey from being a scientist in complete and utter despair to standing here before you today, armed with the truth. Today, I'm going to be telling you about the realities of climate education. So let's start at the beginning of the climate merry-go-round, the indoctrination of school children. Do you realize the alleged consequences from climate change are actually similar to those of war? The child's world is inherently unstable. After all, due to extreme sea level rise and extreme weather events, their lives are at risk. But this is what we're teaching our kids, that the world they live in is no longer a safe and stable environment, that ecosystems are collapsing and their world is on fire. This is an outrage. They're promised this is the truth, and if they question that narrative, the school will write to their parents. No debate allowed. I have been told my whole life that there is impending doom in the form of climate change. It was in the news every day. My teachers schooled me on it. My friends were talking about it. There were even degrees in it. I can be forgiven for believing it. Why wouldn't you believe what your teachers are telling you? They're the ultimate authority at a young age. But the most significant point is this. It is the effect it has on our children. They are scaring our children with these ghastly stories. They are shaping them to feel powerless because they can't do anything about it, and they are molding them to be disillusioned and angry because the so-called people in charge don't appear to be doing anything about it either. This is how you get the Greta Thunbergs of the world. That girl honestly believes her world is burning. Imagine for a second what it truly feels like to believe that. I was at school in 1999, and this new emergency of global warming made me feel anxious. And at that time, 3% of school-aged children were diagnosed with anxiety. By 2023, this had escalated to more than 20% of school-aged children being diagnosed with anxiety. This is not a coincidence. The psychological impact of this story is crippling children's mental health, and it is simply unacceptable. It is wrong, it is socially irresponsible, and the minute they try and peddle that story on my child, well, let me just make this clear. Hell will have no fury like a mother who knows the truth and who is also a climate expert. Hell will not have enough fury. And this is why I'm angry, because I've seen the system from within. And what I found at university wasn't a debate, it was a script. So when I call climate change a narrative, I'm not being edgy, I'm being precise. If you want a quick test for whether something is solid science or nonsense, just look for consistency. And this consistency is exactly what's missing. Firstly, the story keeps on changing. If it were a real story, I guess the general facts surrounding it would probably remain the same. But in the 60s and 70s, the majority of scientists were predicting global warming. But if you looked in the newspaper, you would think we're heading straight into an ice age. In 1974, Radio Times ran the headline, "The Ice Age Cometh." American media followed suit. Every cold weather event was sold as proof that there was an ice age approaching. Sound familiar? It should. It's how the media still works today. A flood, a heat wave, a storm, completely normal weather, splash it across the front page, call it unprecedented, and blame climate change. Everyday weather is rebranded as existential crisis. My point is this. It was never scientists telling the world an ice age was coming. It was the media with their use of selected experts. But why? Let's dig deeper. Newsweek warned governments were unprepared for climate-driven food shortages, and that planners were ignoring climatic uncertainty, and that delay would make the coming crisis impossible to manage. This wasn't just weather reporting. It was a script to create panic about hunger, global instability. They pull the lever for sympathy, for suffering in poorer countries. And even today, we see images of flooded villages, failed crops, desperate families, all offered up as proof of climate catastrophe and as justification for sweeping political action, urgent action, with no time to consider the consequences. In 1988, there was a rebranding exercise. The New York Times headline read, "Global warming has begun, expert tells Senate." I read this article. The evidence rests on 5 months of slightly warm weather. And in climate sciences, a trend takes 30 years to establish, not just a season. And worse still was the baseline they chose, 1950 to 1980. This is the very cooling period they had just used to scream Ice Age. This is a classic case of data manipulation. You take a cold reference point and everything after that is going to look unusually warm. This was never, ever science. There was never, ever a global warming trend. It was data manipulated to tell a story. The Ice Age never came, first wrong prediction, but the story of the Ice Age, that did its job. The media succeeded in creating a generation of fearful believers. In a speech to the Royal Society in 1988, Margaret Thatcher talked about the fear that people were feeling, the fear that humans were creating a global heat trap that could lead to climatic instability. This fear was gaslit by an NGO, the National Academy of Sciences, who promised the warming would cause a sea level rise of several feet over the next century. The following year, another NGO, the UN, went on the record and promised entire nations will be wiped off the face of the earth due to climate change-induced sea level rise by 2020. Well, we're still here, aren't we? Second false prediction. None of this sea level rise has eventuated, and it's exactly the same story they preach today. Extreme sea level rise and climate change refugees are nothing but a myth designed to scare people into whatever policy response is waiting in the wings. This is the first reason that the man-made climate change story is nothing more than a doomsday tale that has been evolving for the last 60 years. Think about it. These were arguably two of the world's most powerful organizations. They'd had access to satellite data for 25 years, the best scientists, the most comprehensive data analysis in the world, plus the mainstream media at their fingertips. Was it really a coincidence that their story never came true? We now know that they would have known via satellites that the sea level was always rising steadily at 1.2 inches per decade, just like it does today. Plus, this sea rise actually brings sediment with it and increases the landmass at the same time, therefore rendering it impossible for islands to sink due to sea level rise. However, because it was never a real story, they were never interested in the real data. They could clearly see that there was no unusual sea level rise, but they intentionally chose to mislead the public and put their fraudulent plan into action. They advised the World Meteorological Organization, another NGO, to create the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, here's where it gets juicy. The IPCC is structurally identical to the single world government model I was presented with during my studies as a prescriptive solution to climate change. My professors in global governance assured me that a global problem requires a single world government to fix it. And I admit it. I believed them. I respected my professors. Most of them were published authors in respected journals, and I was promised a world-class education. But the tragedy is this. They were never training scientists. They were training socialists to enact their agenda. And it's been clear to me for a time now that there's never been a problem with our climate system, just a smokescreen to establish power and create control. Welcome to the only crisis where their solution is always the same: more control, more taxes, and less debate. Let me make it clear how the IPCC benefits from maintaining and creating generations of climate change believers. To start with, they sit at the very top of the climate change establishment. And when I say establishment, I simply mean a stable network of institutions that fund, credential, and publish the urgency of man-made global warming. Climate finance reached a record-breaking $1.9 trillion in 2023, and last year saw a record $2.2 trillion in clean energy investment. That's more than 4 trillion in a couple of years. Think about who are the main winners here. They're the unelected officials that sit atop the IPCC hierarchy. These are the people selling, building, financing, and certifying the global transition to clean energy. They are making billions. And the financial victims? The United Kingdom is a victim. Our economy is on the verge of recession after 30 years of being signatory to international climate agreements. And what do we have to show for it? Not only are our energy bills the highest in the developed world, but the economy outside of London is closer to that of Bulgaria's than Germany's. Today, 18 to 30-year-olds are the first generation to earn less than their parents. We are getting poorer, both relatively and absolutely. My fellow countrymen are suffering, and this also makes me angry. Because of climate policy, because the IPCC says so, we're not allowed to drill our own gas fields, which will make us completely reliant for others' gas in the future. We have the best quality gas in the world, and its exploration has just been made illegal. For existing projects, for every dollar made, the company is taxed upwards of 78 cents due to unnecessary climate taxation. Let's take a really good look at just how much power the IPCC have created for themselves. They act as a global risk allocation engine. They determine which technologies reduce subsidies, which activities become legally constrained, which investments are encouraged or stranded. In the UK, we only have 4 oil refineries left. These are the basic building blocks of the modern industrial economy. But any company that comes in will not make a profit because the taxes are too high. The IPCC is making us poorer, both as nations and as individuals. Recent blackouts across Europe are just a glimpse into the dystopian future which awaits us. As long as they continue to make us believe that man-made climate change is going to end life as we know it, we will keep filtering trillions of dollars throughout their organization without questioning a thing. So what can we do? Firstly, I believe that the average person is more than capable of seeing a situation for what it really is. So please, tune in carefully as I seek to disprove the myth of man-made climate change once and for all. I've got you on tenterhooks now. That's a good thing. Right, you're still with me. Let's bust the first myth. More carbon dioxide causes a warmer planet. Here's the truth. A recent study by arguably 2 of the world's leading atmospheric scientists, both Professor Emeritus, one from MIT, one from Princeton. I mean, these guys are not messing around. They have shown that there is a limit to the amount of heat that is able to be trapped by carbon dioxide, and they call this the saturation point. We are at 99% of the saturation point. Relatively speaking, no matter how much carbon dioxide we pump into the air, it will not increase our global temperature. It is but a fallacy. Joe Rogan recently had those authors on his podcast, Dr. Lindzen and Dr. Happer. Joe Rogan also wants people to stop drinking the Kool-Aid. Now let's bust the second myth, that carbon dioxide is bad for the planet. Guess what? Carbon dioxide is actually good for the planet. That's right, I said it, the truth. Satellite data shows that plant growth has increased significantly over the last 35 years due to increased carbon dioxide. NASA measured a 10% greening of the Earth between 2000 and 2020 alone. Meanwhile, at university, I was taught that trees would starve due to climate change. They intentionally used the word starve to elicit an emotional response. What actually happens is that when there's more carbon dioxide available, not only do plants grow faster, but they use less water. We know this because commercial greenhouses pump carbon dioxide to 1,400 parts per million because it grows the best plants. It's called carbon dioxide enrichment. Come on. Carbon dioxide enriches the earth. And the third myth, carbon dioxide has a direct relationship with temperature. Al Gore was the person responsible for demonizing carbon dioxide, and he said carbon dioxide is the highest it's ever been. It's just another lie. It's actually the lowest it's been in the last 320 million years. Not only that, but some of the highest levels of carbon dioxide occurred during an ice age 340 million years ago, which just proves that carbon dioxide and temperature have no direct link whatsoever. Of course, in my training, carbon dioxide and its rise or fall could explain everything that happened in our climatic history through some sort of feedback loop or time lag mechanism. And this is the whole basis of their argument, that more carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere, the more the temperature will increase. The most important takeaway from this today is that is a lie. The truth is the Earth is just getting greener, and we are simply uneducated as to why the climate actually changes. Indeed, all of us are completely brainwashed to never question it. So why do the IPCC have a conflict of interest with the truth? Let's understand exactly how much power this unelected, undemocratic, unaccountable, non-governmental organization are protecting with their lies. The IPCC produce assessments that 195 governments around the world use as an authoritative reference for climate policy. They use IPCC scenarios to set emissions targets, justify carbon budgets. If countries argue for compensation or climate aid, they cite IPCC risk assessments. The IPCC projections define which regions are at risk and therefore where the money flows. And what they really don't want you to know is that the most powerful leverage is in financial markets. IPCC scenarios are used in ESG scoring frameworks, climate stress testing for banks, insurance risk models, central bank climate risk assessments, and investment screening criteria. In practice, this means that a company's ability to access capital increasingly depends on whether its business model is aligned with IPCC-derived pathways. They have a monopoly not only on the success of entire countries, but on individual business interests. In effect, their projections now sit upstream of policy, regulation, infrastructure, and economic structure. And this is why they carry so much power. This isn't just undemocratic, it's anti-democratic. I never voted for them to make these decisions. These are people that cannot be held to account by the electorate, and that is an unacceptable structure. It is a socialist, globalist agenda that has been carried out right beneath our noses. And it is the spitting image of the one world government framework that was prescribed in my training. So, with the whole world relying on their projections, with trillions of dollars on the line, you would agree that their utmost priority should be the accuracy of those projections. It's why the believers say, look at the data. You can't ignore the data. Well, spoiler alert, the data is doctored, just like it's always been, just like my textbooks were, just like my lecture notes were. This whole thing is indoctrination. And here is the proof. hackers leaked emails from IPCC assessment report authors, which exposed them freely discussing their efforts in deleting and manipulating the real data because it didn't quite fit with their doomsday story. And I quote, "I'll maybe cut the last few points of the filtered curve as that's trending down." They needed it to be trending upward to fit with their past projections. Another email says, "I've just completed Mike's nature trick to hide the decline." These are real emails between the authors of the IPCC report. There are more than 2,000 emails like this showing corrupt behavior, and they are still the lead authors today. They are unelected, corrupt, and have a conflict of interest with the truth. They deliver a pre-written narrative and nothing more. Trillions of dollars of spending rests on fabricated nonsense. In the UK, if we don't allocate our national budget to their satisfaction, we're taken to court. Most recently, we were taken to the European Court of Human Rights because of failure to adequately prepare for extreme heat and flooding. And this, they say, violates fundamental human rights because we are not protecting people against man-made climate change. It is an outrage. So what can we do? It's time to reclaim our sovereignty. And we do this by formally leaving all agreements governed by the climate establishment. Repeal the Climate Change Act, withdraw from the Kyoto Protocol, withdraw from the UNFCCC, leave the Paris Agreement. America withdrew from all United Nations architecture this month. It's time for the rest of the world to follow suit. I can already hear the objections, but if we don't act, aren't we doomed? As a climate scientist, let me reassure you, the climate is meant to change, and it's meant to change drastically. I like to use an analogy when I talk about the climate's natural propensity to change. Imagine no one had ever seen an ice cream before, and people were at a packed racetrack and the ice cream was unveiled. People are amazed. It's perfect, they say, until it starts to melt. They panic and they decide it must be the cars racing around. Stop the cars. But the ice cream keeps on melting. They change the cars to electric, still melting. They build wind turbines and replace the power stations. The ice cream is still melting. But what no one at that racetrack has been taught is that ice cream was always going to melt. It is just its natural state. And this is very much like the Earth. We are in a natural period of warming called the Holocene. We're still coming out of the Little Ice Age, which was between 1400 and 1900. And our Earth's climate gets warmer and cooler in 1500-year cycles. There is also an ocean pattern called El Niño Southern Oscillation, which drives huge temperature changes. And most global warming is in fact driven by changes in the ocean currents. Other changes are driven by orbital forcings called Milankovitch cycles. These cycles change the position of our planet relative to the sun and historically produce an ice age every 100,000 years. There's nothing man-made about it. There is only natural climate change. But training experts that the world will listen to and who will enact their agenda is a crucial part of the IPCC's strategy to retain control. Well, I'm a climate scientist, I'm an expert, so listen to me. All man-made climate education in schools has to stop. It is not science, it is consensus, which is very different to objective scientific fact. Teach them natural climate change. Teach them about Milankovitch cycles, the El Niño. Do not teach them lies that I have just proven wrong. I don't want my child to gain an ideology. I want him to gain an education. The next generation must be clever. And for this to happen, they need to be learning factual information. For anyone out there that has ever felt guilty or afraid due to climate change, I want to reassure you, you are not the problem. We have been brainwashed every day by the media. We are being lied to every day. And if we question it, we're told we're crazy. We're told we're in denial because the climate establishment is afraid. They will tell you that I'm the extreme one because I don't believe the world is on fire. They will do everything they can to make us fearful the world as we know it is ending, burning, boiling, to maintain control, constrain us in regulatory burden, and have us accountable to their courts if we spend our taxpayers' money the wrong way. The climate establishment targeted intelligent people who genuinely loved the environment. They taught us the earth was dying and on the brink of collapse, and I believed it. That is not stupidity, that is programming. Because my university lecturers, who I respected, and the institution of university itself, assured me this was the latest cutting-edge research. I mean, I'm thinking I want my money back at this point. They told you it's settled. They told you it's urgent. They told you to comply. Well, I've told you what they haven't. The climate is meant to change. The man couldn't affect the climate system, even if he wanted to. Carbon dioxide is good for the planet and will not increase the temperature any further. And both children and university students are being brainwashed to blindly perform and enact their agenda. Well, I am no puppet. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The choice of what to believe is now yours, but the establishment should be afraid because I am a climate scientist who knows the truth. Thank you. Thank you so much. I also just want to thank the Heartland Institute so much for having me speak at the inaugural World Prosperity Forum here in Zurich. It's been an absolute honor, so thank you.
Wow, university professors lied. Next, you're going to tell me politicians also sometimes lie. That would be horrible, horrible news. We're learning a lot here in Zurich this week. We have lots of time now for panel discussion. So if we already have a lot of questions from the stream. Thank you very much. We hope to have some more as we go along. Annika, that's what we call in the United States a cleanup hitter. That was, and I think the ball's still rising out there somewhere. So thank you very much for that fantastic presentation and very passionate. That's one thing we do have a lot in the Heartland Institute is passionate about that subject and many more, and especially about freedom. This is the inaugural World Prosperity Forum put on by Heartland. This is something, to be honest, this was not something we planned for an entire year, as a matter of fact. Is that right, James Taylor? It's as a think tank, we're kind of we like to think of ourselves as an action tank, that we don't just stay in our offices in Illinois, in the United States, and write white papers and issue press releases. We are doing very active things every day, every week, and that includes coming to a place like Zurich, Switzerland, so that we are within at least global shouting distance of all the action in Davos. And these sorts of things, which I think are really important. I think the title World Prosperity Forum, that's what it should be titled in Davos. And I think actually when Klaus Schwab started it as a young man in 1971, the focus of it was on genuine economics and how to spread prosperity. And look what it has morphed into. I think it's O'Sullivan's law that any organization that isn't explicitly right-wing becomes more left-wing over time. Well, after more than 50 years, the World Economic Forum has become straight up communist, as we've been discussing here already. But the Heartland Institute is able to do things like this, which I think is really important on a global stage, to bring in speakers who have now become even closer friends, who share a passion for liberty and look around the world and recognize that without people with the ability and the intellect to stand up and make the arguments for freedom, that if you just leave it in stasis, that where you end up is closer and closer to tyranny. And so it takes a lot of effort. It also takes a lot of support we have lots of wonderful supporters at the Heartland Institute. We would love even more. So if you're loving this program, if the more you learn about the Heartland Institute, I think the more you would learn to want to support it. So I hope you will go to heartland.org. We have a donate button up there. I believe no matter where you are in the world, but it's certainly true in the United States, that is a tax-deductible donation. So you can give to us and give to freedom before Uncle Sam takes that money from you, which I always think is a great feature of the American system. So thank you for that. And again, please go to heartland.org. And if you've missed anything in this program, especially my outstanding opening remarks, which a couple people in this room did miss, and I've instructed them, as I will instruct you, all of our coverage from this event all this week here in Switzerland is available at our YouTube page, which is just search for the Heartland Institute. And unless they ban us, you should be able to find it. And you can see coverage from every single day. And we have one more day coming up tomorrow, which is going to be fantastic, with another 3 hours of programming of freedom countering the World Economic Forum. All right. With that, I wanted to get into some questions here. First, a question that I had, and this is for you, Stanislav. This is, you in your remarks, it reminded me a lot of what we've had a lot of friends from Eastern Europe at this event this week, from lots of countries. By the way, Poland's number one. You have the most, the biggest delegation with our conference this week. But there are a lot of countries, and especially it seems in Eastern Europe, that value freedom more than those in the Western part of Europe. And they seem to, I think, as you did today, express a desire for the EU to return to more of an economic agreement, more voluntary, more cooperative, I think is the word that you used. And it's since then morphed into basically a central socialist government. And it seems that if a country expresses any dissent with the ruling class, that they put a lot at risk, especially perhaps even the economy and trade and all that in their country. One, am I assessing that correctly? And two, what are those countries? Because obviously not every country in Europe has the same viewpoint on freedom. How are those conflicts fought, and how are they going to be resolved?
Well, I'm not sure if that question is not above my pay grade, but I will try, because this is like $1 million question, I guess. So let me begin with saying that we all think about EU as a kind of this bureaucratic apparatus, which is correct, but not 100%. And this is good for our sake, because there is a lot of institutions inside the EU that are more not so more prone to democracy, if I may. So you have council, you have all those bodies that are able to act and that are able to change the shape of the institutions, on the policies and so on and so on, with the national democratic mandate. And so the way out of this kind of a struggle is just winning elections in countries like Poland, in countries like England, in all of, well, sorry, not anymore, not anymore. But for the broader European order or relations, England, UK, absolutely as well. So that there is an internal struggle between the democratic elements and between the elites, like that have nothing to do with the democracy. So my answer to this is that there is a shot, there is a chance for us to change, to go back to the line, to lay foundations once again, right? For the EU to be once again a point of reference for the freedom, liberty, market-oriented approach, and so on and so on. And the second question, if I may, if you could.
I don't remember it now.
Me
It's
neither.
been a long time. That was 3 minutes
exactly,
ago.
Exactly.
Goodness gracious.
Me neither. Sorry, I have
It's
this
okay.
oblivious cold, and I'm barely.
Well,
sick, but-
well,
yeah,
let me ask
sure.
just a second question then, because
Yeah.
we had a wonderful delegation from Hungary, and if there's one thing anybody in America probably knows about the conflict between EU, and they're talking about mass migration from the third world, and Hungary right from the beginning said nope. Go over to Germany if you like, and that has caused quite a rift between Hungary and really the rest of Europe, especially the EU. They've seem to have been in conflict ever since. I am ignorant of whether Poland has been as strong in its stance on immigration, for instance, which would have naturally put you in bad with the power sources in the EU.
From the very beginning.
Yep.
From the very beginning, Poland was really vocal about the immigration policies, if you can name it this way, or trying to advocate that it's not a good idea, and this is a good example of a case in which we can see the difference between Eastern and Western Europe, or Central and Western Europe.
Sure.
Because to some extent it wasn't operated through the institutional part of EU. It was also a policy that was supported mostly by Germany, let's say. That was kind of approach that Angela Merkel, as the Chancellor, just wanted to push. So this is a good and bad example of what you can do. I mean, so the EU institutions weren't exactly the driving force behind the whole policy. I guess it was kind of both ideology and economic policy that drove Europe this way. So yeah, Poland was also saying that this is not a good idea, and we are actually struggling with the outcomes of this policy to this day, because we are, for example, suffering from the ongoing pressure on the western Belarusian border. Belarus is actually weaponizing immigration and sending, just profiting from immigrants coming to the Belarus, and then pushing them, taking fees from them and pushing them to Poland and then to Europe.
Yeah, and the irony is that you would think an organization like the European Union's one of its main purposes would be the orderly migration of people in and out of the country, even within the continent itself.
Absolutely.
And obviously that is not their agenda. Let me also remind the panel that if you have questions for each other, you're very welcome to ask them to each other as well. But I want to start here, and we only have the one microphone, and it's unfortunate that this question is for Donald and Linnea on one side or the other. But I wonder if you could, since it's supposed to be ladies first. All right, we'll start with Donald. There we go. You guys went to Davos yesterday. And I wonder if you could, there are some questions people are curious about your impressions there. And I know you gave an interview to a media outlet that already put it out on X, which is great to see. So why don't you give us a little flavor of your experience in Davos yesterday?
Sure. I think Donald and I would both agree that our shortest summary of the vibe at Davos was either just kind of weird, and the vibe of the climate hub in particular was very sad, which is heartening, actually. Like I said, they're not dropping the climate issue. They are not dropping the sustainability stuff. They're just trying to be kind of quiet about it. And that was certainly reflected at the hub there. There was there were not very many people there except at like a restaurant patio nearby. A good number of people crammed inside of their little theater for their breakout sessions. But other than that, not as active as we were kind of expecting, I think. And well, they did have a booth where a guy was educating people about ayahuasca.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it was like corporate granola, and it was, yeah, very strange.
They're trying to get Joe Rogan to come next year, I guess, and be in their booth. So wait, sad as in despondent, that because I want to actually talk a little bit later about how climate used to be the big star of the show around here, and it seems like it's on way off Broadway these days, right?
Yeah. The way I would describe it was like Burning Man meets LinkedIn. It was very strange. You would walk down, you would see the people in the nicest suits kind of walking into the different areas. There was pavilions for, whether it's, BlackRock or Meta Facebook. And then you would turn around and you would see a cross-dressing cow, handing out T-shirts. It was a very strange mixture of stuff going on around Davos. But yeah, Lene and I were talking about, just that sorry state of the climate sector of Davos. So on the train ride home, I decided that I was going to keyword search climate. So at Davos, they have a million different presentations that are in a million different breakout rooms all day long for 5 days. So they have so many different panels that are going on. So I keyword searched climate to see how many would pop up, how many hits it would get for this year's schedule. And there was 11. And I said, I bet that is a far cry from what it was a handful of years ago. So I started going back to all of their schedules for the previous 5 years. Last year, there was 20. The year before that, there was 36. The year before that, there was 45 different panels talking about climate change. And then I started working my way back up to the present, keyword searching artificial intelligence. And it was the exact opposite. The 4 years ago or whatever it was, there was like 7. And then the next year there was 15. And then the next year there was 25. And then this year there was 45. So it seems like they're really downplaying all of the the climate change stuff. When you have Larry Fink explaining that wind and solar can't possibly power the AI revolution, it seems like it would be kind of incongruent to have that message, because he's now the de facto leader of the Davos World Economic Forum, to have him saying that 1 year and then the next year talking about how, well, if we don't do that, the world's going to burn. So it seemed like they were downplaying it. But yes, overall, back to your original question, very strange vibe at Davos, Switzerland.
Can I just speak to that quickly about how it seems that there's not so much hype about climate change where you'd think there would be? I'm just going to come from a cynical, maybe realist point of view. I don't think we can get complacent, because there was definitely a lull between the Ice Age story and the global warming story. I think that they could be working. I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but
No.
they sound the new story might just be being cooked up right now, and it could very well be water scarcity. So I think we shouldn't get complacent. Yeah, that's it really.
Good point. All right. Well, speaking of those breakout sessions, I saw one that Al Gore gave a presentation at in a very small room with hardly anybody in it. You can see these clips on X, and I was actually quite shocked. I mean, this was a relatively last minute event that we're putting on here in Switzerland, and we are in a relatively small room. And we've had twice as many people in our little room, raising the temperature in here and the CO2 content as well, the concentration, than Al Gore had in his room. Al Gore, the man has a Nobel Peace Prize, right? And he has an Oscar, and he has an enormous ego and enormous estates all across the United States. And he can, you could have fit the audience in that room in 2 booths in a Wendy's in the United States. It was amazing. But it actually reminded me, and Annika, when you were speaking so compellingly My mind snapped over to, y'all might remember, well, Al Gore started the Climate Reality Project, right? And the purpose of that was to train people to spread out across the world like Johnny Appleseeds of climate alarmism, and to give public presentations and to tell people, basically fill their heads with climate propaganda. I don't see any news about that anymore. I wonder if it's even still a going concern. If it is, we'll see you out there, encounter those things. But he also said in his presentation, he had an interview in the Bloomberg house. I guess that's what they do down in Davos. You just put your name on something, put a house next to it, so because it's like a ski chalet or something. Okay, that sounds great. Maybe next year we'll have Heartland House. That would be wonderful. But he was at Bloomberg House, so he was talking to the media there. And he said, I had a clip of it. We don't have time to play it here. But he was, again, spouting some of his nonsense and actual falsehoods. He says, parts of the Sahara and parts of the earth, people are living in places where it's so hot and humid that a human can only survive for about 4 hours. I don't know where that is on Earth, except for underwater, I guess. I don't know. And he said that in those extreme conditions, he says those kinds of places are getting worse. He talked about that the Sahara is getting worse. And I'm like, I know that's not the fact right there. And that we already have seen millions of climate refugees, which again made me think of the immigration crisis, which has been on everyone's mind here in Davos. He says we've already had millions of climate refugees, and soon we will have billions of climate refugees, supposedly migrating from places where you can only survive for 4 hours, which is like the moon or Mars on your own, and then into presumably more temperate places like the United States and Europe. Who wants to debunk all of that first? James, why don't you go? You haven't spoken yet.
I haven't spoken yet because I'm not worthy to be sitting here. I mean,
well, you're on the
what
edge.
amazing presentations. Thank you all. As you were teeing up that question, I was thinking of, boy, it's been a long time since I thought of this. One of my early public global warming debates was with a trained member of Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. This was a professor at Florida State University who I guess was feeling his oats. Well, now I already know everything in the world. I have such a big brain, and now I'm trained by Al Gore how to present. So we had this debate in Tallahassee, and before the event, as I always do, you may be terribly wrong, but I'm not going to assume you're a horrible person. I'll be nice to you. And he was cold and off-putting to me, so be it. During my presentation, I'm being as charitable as possible in my tone and demeanor. So I give my PowerPoint slide, much of what Linnea presented 15 years ago data, but what do you know, 15 years later, it still holds true. And so in his presentation, and by the way, as I'm giving it, he's like doing this and looking to his sidekick, like, where'd this come from? This actual data. But anyway, he gives his presentation and he's just a complete jerk. He's making all these snide remarks about Mr. Taylor, and he's just bought and sold by oil money or whatever it was. And it's like, okay, at this point, it was funny. So we had PowerPoints, and you had the screen behind, and there was one screen on one side that was linked to his computer, and one on the other that was linked to mine. And they were both visible in the video shot. So I'm like, all right, you want to play that way. So as he's talking and he says, hurricanes are getting worse, of course, with no data, no facts. I just clicked to my hurricane slide, what Linnea shows, and here's the actual data, which I had already discussed, but reminding the audience, okay, these are my facts, and this is his rhetoric. So that was quite amusing, and that's the way it is with Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. It's the reason why they don't debate today. But my goodness, the point about Al Gore, I understand he was out there heckling. He's been reduced to heckling Trump administration presenters at the World Economic Forum. So he's now become Grandpa Simpson in the background. That's not true back in my day. That's Al Gore, ladies and gentlemen, the star of Hollywood, the savior of the climate alarmism movement. And there's so many idiotic statements that he has made, including some that you mentioned. For example, migration. The argument was that because of drought, when we had all the influx over the southern border into the United States, well, it's our own fault because we have caused climate change, and climate change is making it impossible for farmers to raise crops anymore. The drought, the reduce crop production. They have no choice but to come to America because we have starved them out of existence. This was something that Beto O'Rourke, he based his theme on when he was running for governor in Texas and was thinking about running for president. And so what we do at the Heartland Institute is we actually fact check. Linnea Lucan comes up with the information that you can, okay, this is what Beto O'Rourke and Al Gore say. And then when you look at the data, because the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization keeps yearly updated data, every nation in the world and the globe as a whole, and you look at the countries, and the media packed on Guatemalan migration because of this, Costa Rican, every single nation, and there may be one or two exceptions, but I don't think there are. So we'll say virtually every single nation, but I believe every single nation in Central America, in South America, has seen expanding crop production. Yields per acre have gone up during the period of migration. And as Annika was mentioning, you have the rhetoric, and if you just believe the rhetoric because you've been taught it's true, and they teach young students at university who are becoming climate scientists that this is the case and they don't know the data. So that's just one example of how silly the claims are versus the reality.
Well, this is something that I talk about in my paper that I recently wrote. And this is how the climate establishment has always done this. It's their strategy. And I called it the heat strategy. So H is for hysteria. They create alarm using these outlandish statements like millions of climate change refugees. By the way, I don't think anyone has told Al Gore that the United Nations has already gone on record and said that continents would be underwater in 2020, and that didn't eventuate. So maybe someone should show him that clip. So they create alarm, and then they say that everyday living is the problem. The things we do every day, driving our cars, eating meat, whatever it is, just our everyday living is the problem. Therefore, we need to take action urgently. There's no time to consider the consequences. And that is their strategy. And I call it the heat strategy for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny you bring up, because I'm going to bring this up now, and I was going to bring it up a little later. Speaking of living our lives the way we wish, there was another. Oh, great! Now the Wi-Fi is going to go out on me. There was another. There we go. There was another very sparsely attended side session where a World Economic Forum panelist openly suggests that people should begin eating lab-grown food, calling it the best path forward. Again, there's more people in line at KFC in Dallas, Texas than there are in this room. He claims that excessive consumption of animal protein is a leading cause of non-communicable diseases. He suggests that digital technologies will fundamentally transform how food is produced, distributed, and experienced. And then this person who posted this says, will you ever accept lab-grown food as the new normal? No, for me, as you're asking me, I'll answer that question. But it goes to show that what's so much, and again, climate change was such a star, and Donnie was smart enough to look at how many panels that were done from climate change compared to others, and how it's diminished in the past. So no wonder they are sad and despondent at the climate house out there. You know, they pour one out for our old agenda, I guess. But it seems like so many crazy ideas that come out of the WWF are justified by climate change. I mean, why would you need lab-grown meat unless flatulating cattle are destroying our atmosphere, right? And so, what are your top 3 favorite crazy policy ideas that are going to go the way to the dodo once the world actually comes to understand that humans are not causing a climate crisis? My number 1 is lab-grown meat.
The lab-grown one is really good, especially because the lab-grown meat scenario is so much more energy intensive than just raising a cow. The electricity costs and stuff to run one of those labs is phenomenal. Especially now when they've not come anywhere near close to creating large scale production of it. It's such a stupid idea. It's the kind of thing that only somebody who's neck deep in tech bro authoritarian social circles would think of and say, this sounds like a great idea, let's just do that, and then never like look outside and talk to anybody who would just stare them dead in the face and tell them how dumb of an idea it is. But that's definitely one of them. My other ones would be certainly, well, on the food issue again, the idea that like insect farming is the way forward. They sell bugs here in Switzerland in the grocery store for consumption in like baggies of dried bugs. In the United States, you might get some specialty store or something that will do that, or you'll get like novelties that will have a little baby scorpion in it or something as something to gross you out with, basically. But it's astonishing that they tried really earnestly to push that. And I think that's already dying out before the climate thing has even really been crushed. So that one is another one. And then my third would be the strangeness of them completely and utterly ignoring nuclear, and that's being destroyed by the tech boom, you know, the AI energy demands and stuff. But these Greens have been pushing wind and solar for years and years and years on the grounds of emissions and environmental impact, when nuclear has been sitting there all along, which also does not have any carbon dioxide emissions. Not that I think that we need to be getting rid of carbon dioxide emissions, but if you're worried about that,
Right.
nuclear was right there and it works. France has been running it for decades. They've been recycling used material even. There are ways to do it. You don't even have to invent the new small modular reactors and stuff to make it work. It already does. So that the ignoring or the suppressing of nuclear technology is another one that I'll be happy to see go by the wayside.
If I didn't know any better, I think you were telling me that the WF is not interested in having cheap energy for everyone. That would be crazy.
No, yeah, like I had said on when I was doing the Q&A on Monday, my favorite example is, and I'll say it again in case people weren't watching then, was the Sierra Club. And they took it down off their website, but several years ago, if you went to their website and looked up nuclear power, they said that they were against nuclear power until the regulations could prevent any potential pollution or unnecessary economic growth, which is just a term that I have never heard of before outside of the Sierra Club website. They've taken that down since then. It took a minute to come up with 3, Jim, but I did write down the eat the bugs thing.
Eat the bugs, yeah.
That one is one of those things where if you mention it at a party or something like that, people look at you cockeyed like you're, some conspiracy theorist. But you can go to the World Economic Forum website and you can look for these sort of articles, and you can find dozens of them talking about how great it is and how much more sustainable it is for bug protein. Pretty recently, they opened up like a mega factory in Canada to produce bug protein. So this was a thing was catching on. I don't know what the status of that all is right now. I can't imagine that stocks for bug protein companies are doing so well right now. But I don't think that that's going to have a long lifespan. Probably a bug-sized lifespan. Electric vehicles. Now I know Elon is not going to drop that anytime soon. He's doing his darndest to make electric vehicles seem hip and cool. Opinions are split on what people think about the Cybertruck. I think it's kind of cool looking, but whatever. But you should have seen the electric vehicles that they were pushing down at Davos.
Were they literally pushing that?
They were. They literally were, because there was a little snow hill that they had to get it up on, and they were pushing it on, but it was literally the size of me. Like it was like they constructed a little thing around a bicycle or something like that. So I think, again, maybe electric vehicles won't necessarily go away completely, but I do think that the idea of, some of these municipalities that we talk about on the, climate realism show at the Heartland Institute, that are north of the Mason-Dixon line in the United States, where they're trying to get all of their public buses, electric vehicles, and then they stop working when the temperature goes below 20 degrees or something like that. That's Fahrenheit. I think maybe we'll see an evaporation of that, or at least, money going towards those sorts of things. And then the last one on my list is the idea of 15-minute cities. So this is another one that even the left will say, no, that's just conspiracy theory. There's no 15-minute cities. We just want cities where you can go anywhere within a 15-minute span, and you can't drive. And you can't drive on certain roads, unless we tell you we're allowed to, and all of those certain things. I think that if the climate hysteria evaporates a little bit, calls for that sort of like ground level, individual level control will hopefully evaporate as well.
All right. Well, excellent. Well, I have a question here that maybe Stanislaw can address. I have some good news for you. So German Chancellor Merz, who's not Angela Merkel, he's quite different. If this is accurate, there is a video. Have not watched it, but I'm going to read the summary. He says, both Germany and Europe have wasted incredible potential for growth in recent years by dragging their feet on reforms and by unnecessarily and excessively curtailing entrepreneurial freedom and personal responsibility. We must substantially reduce bureaucracy in Europe, he says. The single market was once created to form the most competitive economic area in the world. Instead, we have become the world champion of overregulation. This has to end. Did you write that for him and slip it into his briefcase?
Sure. Yeah, but so lesson learned to some extent, obviously, right? So the optimism I have comes from the fact that as you see, even the Chancellor of Germany, sees that there is something went wrong. Something went south somewhere in between. So yeah. So there is hope, right? There is hope through the democratically elected politicians and decision makers. The most important challenge we are facing right now as Europe and so on is kind of implementation, right? Execution, because we had in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of cutting red tape and so on. You can see, like 10 years ago there was something called Juncker's plan. And it was also aiming at cutting bureaucracy, cutting red tape, investing in technology, and so on. You had Juncker, you had the Draghi plan, and so on. So there is some kind of reflection. There is a lot of talking, right? A lot of words. Right now, what do we as civil society, as NGOs, as some groups that wish both Europe and the United States well, what we need to do is to push for those words to be those people to put their money where their mouth are, right? So
Yeah.
Sure.
Great observations by my friend Stan. And I will even more so defer to and promote your first solution, which is elections, because Mertz talking about the need to reduce regulation is like Joe Biden declaring the need to secure the southern border. I mean, seriously, it's one thing to say what you need to say. It would be something if he does it, and maybe due to political pressure, he will. But I think it's going to take elections. But look, anyway, I'll forgive the sins of the past, or at least overlook them, if the ruling behavior changes. Harold Wilimski, member of the European Parliament representing Austria, talked in his presentation on day one about how in the European Union Parliament, where the true freedom advocates have to battle against folks who take on the label of conservative but really aren't. We see that in the United States. My friends in Europe and various parliaments tell me the same thing. So in Germany and elsewhere, you may have self-identified conservative parties, but these are the parties that have created the mess regarding energy, extreme energy policy, and extreme promotion of net zero, immigration policy, etc. In the UK, for example, just recently you have the Tories and even Labor, where you had Tony Blair recently saying, yes, we overdid it with net zero. And it's just a few years ago, actually less than a few years ago, when reform is getting savaged by the media and those parties for not being 1,000% enthusiastically promoting net zero. I mean, Boris Johnson was an enthusiastic promoter of net zero, still is. He lashes out at even members of the Tory party who've come around. Theresa May did the same thing. So on the one hand, yes, I'm glad to hear Mertz acknowledge something. I don't know if he truly believes it. It's kind of like Gavin Newsom going on Sean Hannity and like agreeing with everything he says. No, I'm very reasonable. We have a few differences, but I'm very reasonable. So hopefully the words will be backed up by actual policy changes. But I'm an enthusiastic supporter of your first solution, which is elections. That's how we make a difference, I think.
Excellent. All right. I have a question here for Annika. This is from our producer, Andy. Hey, Andy, back in the United States and behind the scenes here for our stream. He says, in an honors level social studies final exam, my sophomore year of high school, one true-false question read, quote, denying climate change is akin to denying the Holocaust, unquote. He asks, how do we rid schools of such blatant fear-mongering? And are you aware of this, if it's still going on today? Because that certainly was going on when Andy was a boy.
Thank you, Andy. That's really interesting. It's definitely still going on today. I don't know if it's to that extent. I mean, something like that is pretty out there. But, you know, this is what is happening with free education. It's free for a reason. The reason is that I'm going to call it the climate establishment, can filter down what they need that generation to believe throughout their lives in order to comply. And I wish that wasn't the case. I wish I wasn't sitting here right now saying that, because that's not great. I was taught that my whole life. I went to a private high school. I was not taught about climate change there. But at university, it was waiting for me. So, you know, it's in free education, definitely in the United Kingdom, definitely in Australia. I'm not sure about America, but yes, I'm thinking this is a kind of globalist West epidemic. I don't know if anyone else has any comments on that.
Just to add for non-Americans in the audience that, yeah, in the United States too, public school in particular is really bad about it. But also I would venture to guess most of our private schools involve a large amount of climate propaganda. And it's not surprising either. You know, our teachers don't know any better either. They should, but they don't. I had a teacher when I was a kid who told me that polar bears weren't good swimmers.
Yeah.
Their scientific name is Ursus maritimus because they're such good swimmers. And so so they don't know either. They just have a curriculum that they follow. So I did get frustrated and mad at my teachers when I was a kid for telling me that kind of stuff, but I don't get as mad at them now, except in that they're being negligent with the information that they're teaching kids. But yeah, they don't know either.
I think it's cute that you expect your public school teacher to know Latin, but I think that's very, very cute. And actually, we have good news. A shameless plug alert right here. There is no excuse for any teacher to not know the facts about the climate. The Heartland Institute has a book called Climate at a Glance. It is not propaganda. It is straight up data. That's all it is. And it's data from the sources that even some global outfits like the United Nations count on for their to tell us what's going on the climate. They lie about it. We present the data. It's climateataglance.com. We just came out with a second edition. A few years back, we mailed the first edition to thousands of public school teachers that teach science across the United States. But if your kid comes home with climate indoctrination coming out of their mouths, You need to get climateataglance.com seriously. And then you need to bring that to school, bring it to your school board meeting and say, why aren't my kids being taught facts instead of propaganda? Because it's right here and it's very simple. I think there are 40 different things in Climate at a Glance in the second edition. So whether you'll learn, for instance, that polar bears can swim, you will learn that hurricane intensity is it's not more intense over the last many, many decades. You'll learn more about the actual climate data, I should say the temperature record across the United States and around the globe. Every single key topic on climate that you really should know about, and it's very simple to understand, is in that book, climateataglance.com. There's also the website that we have that is the exact same thing, but you can go to Amazon and get the printed version, and many of them mailed right to your house. Oh, Annika, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been to the Climate at a Glance website, and it's absolutely, well, it's like the Bible, right? I actually was taking notes on it because, you know, I'm sure there's something I'm still brainwashed about. So, and actually, this is the problem with today's woke society. My truth seems to cut it, but actually what we all look for here is the truth. So I just wanted to comment back onto the teachers. The problem is that, you know, they were taught it at school. They were taught that at school. And why on earth would they question, like myself, what their teachers were telling them? And so now they are teaching it. I mean, it's not some evil thing that the teachers are cackling like witches at night. They honestly believe it. And this is the problem with the indoctrination. And I'm actually not sure how you, well, you know.
Well, what makes it harder is that you're supposed to trust your teachers. You should be able to trust your teachers. So they're either ignorant or they're lying. Neither is good.
And Annika says, I'm not sure how you, and then trailed off, but combat that. Well, dang it, it's by getting them to view your talk. You're amazing. And by getting them to watch Linnea and the information she provides. So, yeah, those are your two sources.
I was already plugging the book, James. You
Yeah,
stepped
more
all over
plugs.
that. All right. So I have a question. Donnie is going to tickle Donnie's ears here. So your boy, your best friend, Larry Fink, is all over the place. I think he's very much one of maybe the number 5 muckety muck at the WEF. He's on the executive board or whatever. But this is something that I know you want to speak about. So he was on a panel. Unlike Al Gore, he gets to be on the big stage because he's important. And he says he's promoting financial tokenization and digital currency as, quote, necessary. And he's envisioning all assets sharing a single blockchain. And good news, Donnie, he claims that such a system will reduce corruption. So your reaction to, because I think that's going to be another topic. You say AI is increasing in popularity and intensity. Obviously, digital currency is as well.
Yeah, so this is something that's been going on for a while, and it's a very complex topic. You know, the tokenization of assets, the whole idea of blockchain, and how this really kind of got its start with, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, that sort of thing. But it is definitely the direction that all of these international financial players are pushing in, is that all of these assets will be tokenized and distributed through the blockchain. So transactions will be able to be faster, more efficient. There'll be a paper trail, or a digital paper trail, I guess, of all of these different transactions and all of those sorts of things. And like I said, they kind of push it as this idea that it'll be more efficient. And similarly with the CBDC, the same sort of rhetoric that goes along with that a lot of times the CBDCs, central bank-backed digital currencies, which I should note is very different than a cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins are supposed to increase anonymization, and the idea of a decentralized ledger system gets really heady, I know. But a CBDC is a very centralized one, where the central bank that is utilizing it would be able to keep track of all the different records and what you spend all of your money on. And they have the same rhetoric where, you know, they could talk about how in events where we need to stimulate the economy, we could just basically airdrop money from the Fed right into everybody's accounts. You don't have to wait for a check to come in the mail and hope that it comes to the right address and all of those sorts of things. But what comes along with the CBDC specifically is an impossible amount of control that would not have been able to go along with paper currency or even just like a credit card system, where along with a transaction transactions can carry with it this metadata that can contain stuff down to like what the carbon footprint of the good or service that you're paying for, with your CBDC is. So all of this could be used as, kind of part and parcel of a social credit system where they can find out that you are overspending when it comes to your carbon footprint, or, you are spending too much on gasoline, you're driving too much, those sorts of things. So where I do sympathize with the idea that some of these things going that digital route will increase efficiency in a whole variety of different areas. It comes with it a bunch of things that we need to be worried about as people that advocate for individual liberty, personal autonomy, and that is increased levers of control.
The further you go down that rabbit hole, the darker it gets.
That's understatement, yes.
Right.
Wait, can I comment
Sure.
on that for a second? And I wanted to point out too, I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Donald, but all the things that you just said, they would say the same thing, but with a smile on their face as if it's a good
That's
thing.
right.
They would say, and we can track all of our customers' carbon footprints and everything so that we can lock them down on loans and stuff. If their carbon footprint isn't good, we can really make sure that finance is sustainable and blah, blah, blah. And they will say it with a smile on their face. This is not like a secret. I was just thinking about a video by a comedian that I saw a couple of years ago where he was reviewing some British television show where they were interviewing conspiracy theorists. And one of these conspiracy theorists was saying that, oh, well, the World Economic Forum has people that want to like control your ability to, move across state lines and stuff and be where you live and all of that. And the interviewer goes, well, why do you believe that? And this comedian pauses the video and he breaks in and he goes, well, they just started saying it on television. They just started saying that that's what they wanted. So it's not even a secret.
Yeah.
But this kind of feeds into the digital IDs and the 15-minute cities. Isn't it all kind of the same goal? In the UK, they were trying to bring in the digital ID, but it just got scrapped, which is very good. But it kind of all leads into the same thing, doesn't it?
We actually did. I'm very happy to hear that the UK the digital ID got scrapped, because we actually did, when that was popping off just, I don't know, a few months ago, maybe. We did a lot of work on that and kind of looking into it. And, again, like, just to what Linnea was saying real quick, when we were in that climate panel that we sat in for like 5 minutes, they mentioned something along the lines of like, oh yeah, a lot of these companies aren't really talking too much about their sustainability things for like good reason. And basically that good reason was Donald Trump's in office. It's not really politically advantageous to like promote all of those stuff, but the time will come again where it will be. But the digital ID concept, I think will basically serve as a foundation on which a social credit scoring system will be built on. It'll be a centralizing repository for all of the different information, what services that you interact with the government, all sorts of things will go in there. Oh yeah, this is what I was getting at. We were talking about on Monday, the World Economic Forum has a routine of taking stuff off of their website when it becomes controversial. That in the future you'll own nothing and be happy article is the most famous example of that. They scrapped that from their website. You can only find it if you use like an Internet Wayback Machine. But in terms of the size and scope and potential scale of a digital ID scam, you could find white papers on the World Economic Forum website that outlines how it could be connected to everything, including the media that you consume, your social media footprint. It even touts that like one day your grocery store coupons could even be run through this. So it just like there was a point in time where they were very upfront about this and promoting this like it's going to be the savior of humanity. Now, once we're paying attention to it and saying like, hey, doesn't this have some freedom implications? They try to tamp it down a little bit.
All right. Well, if Larry Fink says that digital currency is going to reduce corruption and is good for you, you can take that to the bank. Or I guess not take it to the bank because they won't exist anymore the way we know them. All right. I just got word from our producer, Andy, that climateataglance.com has gone down. Although we have it here, it may not be anywhere. So they're paying attention, guys. They're watching the WEF. Hello. and we hope you're enjoying the discussion. We have a few more minutes here. I have, I just lost my my question. Oh, and well, I'll get this one. This is from Stan Goldenberg, a regular viewer of our streams. Hello, Stan. And this is actually a very good question. We've talked about the fact that climate has been de-emphasized at WF this year compared to last year. The question I think is interesting to answer is why?
The energy demands of AI, making it extremely obvious that renewables aren't going to cut it. It was already obvious. The data was already there that renewables were not going to be able to take over a significant portion of the grid. From what I understand, they're already, at least in the United States, pretty much at the point where it's diminishing returns. They've probably already passed that point, especially when it comes to like solar that's grid connected instead of just personal home connected. So I think really it's just all these big financial companies and stuff are looking at what they're going to invest in. They take a look at AI. Someone like Mark Zuckerberg or another big tech guy who is looking at investing in this and building stuff to house all of the computer servers that it's going to take to do this are saying, we've crunched the numbers. There aren't enough. There's no ability for us to do all of this on battery packs. We're watching these other battery pack, locations in California and stuff go up in flames every once in a while. So maybe we don't want to do that. It's not economically feasible to do that. But SMRs are more affordable for them to start looking into. So that's what they're looking into. And they're even talking about, restarting 3 Mile Island or something just to run a data center. My biggest concern with that element is that they're not going to stop the sustainability stuff for the rest of us. And what they're going to do is they're going to kind of privatize the electrical grid to themselves and say like, well, we can invest in nuclear, we can invest in coal, we can do all of this, we can have these private plants for our own data centers, but the rest of you get blackouts and stuff because you get to be on wind and solar.
Yeah, and just to amplify that, there is a reason why big tech, when they're building their new data centers, why they are not proposing to build for themselves or contract with wind farms, with solar facilities. It's because they know it's not going to work. And they have it coming. It's their own just desserts because they have been carrying water for the renewable energy industry for many, many years. They have been suppressing our ability to point out the truth and the facts on this. And as Linnea points out, it goes beyond simply abandoning their preference for wind and solar, and which is a reason why it's like a deathscape in the climate change pavilion down the road at Davos. It goes beyond that, in that they want to have, now the next step is they want to have their own dedicated power plants that are nuclear, that are coal, that are natural gas. And they still do not want the rest of us to be able to do that. And the result is that they are going to get under their sweetheart deals, and they go to state policymakers, because I've spoken with many of them, but we're going to have all these jobs. They promise all these jobs, and you're going to drive up energy costs and living costs for everybody else. Many, if not most, of the jobs are going to be coming from other states and regions. They're going to be moving from San Jose to Nashville. It's not going to be all the people in Nashville now suddenly get flooded with job prospects. They want the benefits and advantages for themselves. They still don't want anybody else to benefit from them. And that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, I just thought of one snide remark too, where I'm talking about this 21st century collectivism and how it's going to be, powered by artificial intelligence and digital IDs and, ESG and all of these things that that require this mass collection of data. And all of that requires a ton of energy, right? So, when we were talking about Larry Fink and saying how the AI revolution isn't going to be able to be powered by wind and solar, I think like the reading between the lines of that is, our global totalitarian ambitions can't be powered by wind and solar. I think that's the realization that's going on.
Oh, That's hopeful. That's great. All right. You're always bringing it down to the press.
Yeah, and let's end with that.
Sucks. Yeah, no. We should be giving credit for not actually bringing up Donald Trump's name this entire Q&A, which has gone on longer than any Q&A in our 3 days, or now 4 days of doing this forum here in Switzerland, the World Prosperity Forum. But I'd said in my opening remarks that, and it's true, and you look at the media coverage, that the two things people were talking about in Davos was Donald Trump and AI, and almost every other topic got shunted aside, including climate, to a large extent. So maybe just opposite ends of the table, but you guys went to Davos yesterday. Were the people on the streets also just talking about Donald Trump nonstop? He has a certain talent for dominating discussions, and was it on the street as well?
So when we were walking down, so like I said, this whole big strip, corporate granola is what Linnea said. Burning Man meets LinkedIn. We were walking down the strip, and then eventually you get to a cement barricade, and beyond the barricade are a bunch of police, and beyond the police are a bunch of police with dogs. So it was like, this is as far as you can go. But at that barricade, there was a big protest that was going on. We can kind of, as we got closer, we can hear it kind of rumbling up. And I was like, I wonder if this is Donald Trump related, because he's speaking right now. As we got closer, it wasn't. It was about like Turkey or something. I don't remember what it was. Iran protests. But it didn't have anything seemingly to do with Donald Trump specifically. But I will say, as we were walking around, like, I did see a few MAGA hats, which I thought, those people would have been like just hooked and thrown into a black taxi and driven away or something maybe a few years ago. But I did see that. But beyond that, I don't know. I didn't see any effigies. I didn't see any, terrible signs specifically about Donald Trump. So I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. Maybe you saw something I didn't.
I didn't see anything about where people were, protesting Trump specifically, but I did overhear people's conversations, those people who were speaking English, and Trump, or something that Trump is currently talking about, like Greenland or something, was probably the number one overheard conversation that I noticed. Even in, the like LinkedIn pavilion where all those like Cloudflare and the AI buildings and everything, where it was like Greenland and Trump's coming, and we went over to the USA House, which they rented out, I guess, like a church to put that in, and that's where you start seeing the MAGA hats wandering around.
Nice.
So it was interesting. But yeah, I think people were talking about it. Just they didn't have, protest displays about Trump, which actually kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's speech yesterday began right as we started our program yesterday, which is a little bit of bad timing when it comes to having people watch the live stream. But Annika and Stan, did you guys get a chance to listen to or watch Trump's speech yesterday, or do you have any impressions? Because my opinion is that since winning the second election, Donald Trump has. It's not just because of energy for AI and all that stuff. I think Donald Trump as president signaled to the world that the green energy scam is dead. It's not going to make it, because and we pulled out of the IPCC, we pulled out of the conference, the conference treaty on climate. That to me is pretty significant, and it gives them an excuse really to move on to something better. But you guys can comment on Trump if you'd like.
I didn't actually get a chance to watch it. I did put it on, but it's kind of how all bad stories end. I fell asleep. So unfortunately not, but I look forward to watching it and giving it my full attention.
Great.
Likewise, I'm afraid me neither, because I was stuck in a plane, and I don't recommend Lufthansa internet connection in a plane. So.
Well, that's very disappointing when that was my closing question, I gotta say. But I do. But it's not going to be our closing question for this entire event, because we are back here again tomorrow at 3 p.m. Central European Time, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, for day 5 of the Heartland Institute's World Prosperity Forum. We have another great lineup of speakers for you, and we really hope you will show up on this live stream and leave questions for us in the chat. I want to thank everyone who is watching here live today, and we will see you again live tomorrow. Bye-bye.